Sarah and I had kind of worked on at least kind of a rough agenda, and it was really meant for just, sort of discussion purposes, and sort of what we thought about really trying to do kind of three things. One would just be kind of a brief, sort of where are we? The second piece would talk about where do we need to be, just trying to see if there's some consensus on sort of what we want to do. And then the third piece of the conversation will really be around how do we get there? A little bit about the process, how will the town council sort of do some of its work? How will the Board of Education do some of its work? What work do both bodies want the joint finance committees to do? And then importantly about the budget schedule. Does that, anybody have any suggestions? Does that work for most of the folks that are on the phone?
I have a question.
Yeah, hi Betsy.
Well, it is just a workshop, but is there any public commentary anticipated?
Here's what I
think what we'll do as usual in the workshop, I think Paul is behind the scenes working his magic. He's like Oz behind the scenes. I think he's monitoring both this, the YouTube. And I should say at the top, if anybody is uncomfortable using those formats, Paul is also monitoring our town email. So if anybody does have any questions that you want repeated, just email town council, all one word, towncouncil@scarboroughmaine.org. So yes, Betsy, I think at the end, we'll kind of open it up to questions and comments and public comment. And okay. I'm sure as Paul's facilitating kind of, running the technology, if you will, if something comes up, he may want to interject. So
thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So with that, I just thought for some context where we are, as everybody knows, the last week we heard that the combined two budgets together come in with about an approximate 5.5% increase. That is approximate. The numbers have been moving. There may be some changes, but that was sort of the best sort of estimate when it was presented last week, or at least we looked at it last week. Just putting some context around that means for the average home, if it's 400,000 or, it's on either side of that, that'd be an increase of about $325 per household, just to kind of put it in context. There's been, the conversation around where do we need to be. All these are just some brackets. Certainly all of you have probably seen, some of the emails back and forth. There's some folks, our original target was 3%. That 3% really was, this was before our current circumstances. So if we need to come in somewhere under that, this is just kind of just a benchmark, a frame of reference saying to get to 0 to 1% increase in the tax rate, we need to reduce the budget collectively by the range of numbers that I show. And these are just ballpark, and I'm sure John's probably got much better numbers, but just as placeholders for now, if it's 1 to 2%, the revised budget reduction is somewhere between 2.2 and 3.1 million. If we come in 2 to 3%, from where we are, it's a budget reduction of 2.2 to 1.7. And I'm not quite sure why the 3% is in that range. But anyway, those are just kind of the numbers that we, are for consideration of what it's going to take to deliver, tax rates in those sort of corridors that I've outlined. And then, so I guess I'll leave that there and just kind of open it up to conversation about what everyone is feeling based on feedback, based on circumstances, based on where we find ourselves today. What do you think we need to do is sort of, what do we think the community will accept? And Tom, I'm going to kind of ambush you. I do know in the past, we've always had some concerns. It's a really tight corridor between when the budgets are finally approved by the town council and the voters, and when you have to actually set the mill rates and get the tax bills out, which is what you have to know by sort of August to make the tax commitment.
Yes, it's typically the second or third week of August every year. And that's essentially predicated on a number of things. Really, the fact is we run into a big cash flow problem.
Yeah.
So we need that first wave of cash receipts in mid-October. So for us to do the commitment, print the bills, send them out, and then give taxpayers a sufficient amount of time to respond and pay their taxes puts us in that late August timeframe.
And can you talk a little bit? I know one year we were close to that, where I think it was the third round of the budget approvals. We were really concerned about that cash flow issue. And there's some consequences to that, right? That if the town,
yeah, we would in fact that year we looked at tax anticipation notes. That's borrowing short-term money just to pay our bills, and so there's interest expense that we should avoid, at all costs if we can. But there are ways around a short-term cash crunch, and it would be through that method. I'm hopeful that we can get our work completed without that being an issue, but I appreciate you making note of that now.
And so, I mean, part of the reason I bring it up as we start the conversation would be if the first referendum vote's not till July 14th, if the budget isn't approved at July 14th, then that starts to really, that's why that becomes an issue for us to consider. So
true, I will share, and Sandy and Diane might be able to comment further. I'm not sure if the superintendents have made a formal request, but I know Maine Municipal Association continues to be in conversation with the governor's office about potentially waiving the school validation requirement for this year because of the uniqueness. Sandy, is that a part of a conversation through your channels at all?
I've heard some of that, but I haven't had an update on that, Tom. So I don't know where it's at this point.
So there's nothing definitive, but I can tell you I'm quite sure that there'll be a formal ask of the governor. I don't know how receptive she'll be to that. So that's something we'll probably know in the next couple of weeks, my guess is.
And Tom, what's the implication of that?
It would relieve the local requirement for validation, voter validation of the school budget. This is a new phenomenon. Prior to 2008, that was never required. The local legislative body had the ability to approve municipal and school budgets as the legislative body of the community. In 2008 was the first time we saw this validation piece.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it'll be successful. I just mentioned it in passing.
Tom, I'll just throw out there, the way I read the statute for this is if we fail to have the budget validated at the referendum, then the latest or most recent approved budget by the municipal officers would be available to, or that we could use that for the tax commitment. I don't know if you've gotten guidance contrary to that, but that's the way that I read it.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to the last part of your comment as regards tax commitment, but I would agree that the most recent approved budget by the legislative body, the town council in this case, is the budget for operating purposes until such time the voters validate a budget. I have not explored the scenario whereby it passes the commitment time.
Councilor Gleason, if you have a question?
No, I have a comment and a question, I guess. So I think, one of the areas to focus on is page 10 in the budget book, which is the revenues that we have projected for FY21. And so I'd like to understand, what the thinking is currently on those numbers that are reflected on page 10 of the budget book, which is, for anybody who's not looking at it or doesn't have the slide, I'm not sure if we could bring the slide up, but for, those are where we expect revenue to come from for the town for FY21. And so I guess my question is to Tom. So when we talk about a 0% tax increase, mill rate increase, and we go with the assumption that, which I don't think we can, but we go with the assumption that everything on page 10 is correct. What would that represent in terms of a budget increase, if any, based on increased valuations in the town or new property that's coming online, or I know you put a lot of work into doing, kind of really looking at the bottom line of the denominator. So Peter showed us a slide that showed the numbers we'd be looking for from cuts to what's been presented. What would we be looking at fiscal year 20 versus fiscal year 21 if we were to stay budget tax neutral, but not necessarily budget neutral? So mill rate neutral, but not budget neutral. And maybe you can't answer that right now, but that's one area I have some interest.
Yeah, Betsy, this is Peter. My numbers that I presented on the agenda assumes that it is a no change in the mill rate. It does take into account the increase in valuation. I think, Tom, the increased valuation net was about 10 million.
Yes.
And
So I wish I had some advance notice of the question, but I'm fairly confident in saying it's about a 200,000. It would allow for about a $200,000 increase in expenditure.
Yeah, Tom, when I did the calculation, I think, yeah, that's just about right. So to answer Betsy's question, the numbers we looked at on the agenda assumes the same mill rate. It does assume some increase in expenditures. So given that backdrop, anybody have any things they'd like to share about?
Well, and Peter, can I just follow up?
Yeah.
So, but it also assumes on page 10 that we expect to get those revenues that we forecast on page 10.
Yes.
And maybe this isn't the meeting we want to talk about that, but for the 13 million and the especially the 6.15 million for excise tax, what are we feeling like how these numbers may come in?
I don't think this is the meeting for this conversation. We could probably and should probably spend half an hour on most of these, and I would respectfully suggest that this is not the time to do that. I think I was pretty careful in flagging that I need some help. I mean, I'm using my best judgment. I will say on excise, I checked today, we are 1% below where we were this day last year.
Okay.
So,
all right, thank you.
So we'll spend a lot of time, I assure you.
Yeah, and I think, Betsy, for some of that will be further on the agenda, the town council process. The town council process will be looking at the municipal budget. Tom, I think you can confirm in prior years, excise tax has been a long conversation for many different reasons. So
it has, and every time we've increased it with some great concern that we wouldn't meet the target, we've always met it. It's been remarkable in terms of its performance. I think this is a different year, though.
So based on that, going back to the 30,000 level view and just trying to get everybody's perspective, and I guess I'll only share mine. I'm concerned that I think given this environment, given the fact that we have a lot of business closures, the Wall Street Journal I sent it around today is now saying sort of the first wave of people impacted are restaurant workers and retail and some of the others. They're now expecting a lot of professionals, lawyers and others are going to be sort of a second wave of impact to all this. I'm just concerned that I think a 5.8% increase is going to be a really tough sell for our public, our constituents. So with that, if anybody have any thoughts on where we should look to go and how we get there and where do we need to go from here? I think, Sarah, you got?
Yeah, sorry, Peter. Not sure how you guys facilitate your meetings, if you would prefer us to just physically raise our hand or use the raise hand button.
Yeah, I mean, this is a new territory for all of us. So
Yeah.
everybody's think raising hands for now work great.
Okay, cool. I think I have a thought on that, but I did just want to clarify. I'm looking at a spreadsheet that is a physical one, so unfortunately I can't share it. But it's one that Kate created for us, I think last year during the budget process, and it basically goes through basically since FY9 what we've asked for in terms of budget increases and what the result of that has been for the mill rate increase. and maybe this is just for my edification, because I'm looking like in FY19, for example, our mill rate percentage change from the prior year was 0%, which is kind of what we're talking about doing. But that still came with a 5.93% increase in expenditures on the school side. And so I guess to go to your later point is, I don't have the answer to this, and I think this is for discussion, but like, what are all the inputs that we're considering to get to, or like, are you guys suggesting that we just come up with a target and then we kind of work backwards to get to that? Or are we going to look at all the inputs? Because I don't think anyone would say that there's not going to be an impact to the Scarborough, the local economy. We all see it. I mean, Tom, you're talking about it just in terms of the excess tax, but we all know or have been touched by people who have lost their jobs or their families are impacted one way or another. What I would like to try, what I'm trying to understand, and maybe we don't have this information yet, is like, what is the actual impact? And what is the actual impact to our taxpayers to not pay either existing taxes or more taxes next year? Because those are the things that I like, some actual data that we could see to help inform this decision, rather than just saying we want to get to 0%.
Sarah,
Yeah,
I'll take a stab if I could. I appreciate and very much would like to have the same sort of data from which to base a decision. My strong suspicion is we're not going to have that level of clarity in the next couple of months. We can do some fairly granular analysis of unemployment claims in town. Is that a direct reflection on folks' ability to pay? Arguably, yes, but there's all sorts of other factors. So I'm afraid we're just not going to have all those answers. So I think it comes down to somewhat of a political calculus of where we need to be. I can tell you the attitude embraced by the town council and the Board of Education back in 08-09 was, we can't be the solution, but we don't want to exacerbate the problem. And so right or wrong, they did a 0%, and largely they did that on the back of using fund balance. I can tell you we're still digging ourselves out of that hole. At the time, it seemed to make sense, and it was the right decision for the group at the time. So I know that's not terribly helpful at all, but I'm just afraid we're not going to have those answers.
Okay, and then I guess just to my other point around the 0%, I think I forget who asked the question, but Tom, you had said something about a 0% mill rate would equate to roughly 200,000 in expenditure increase. Is that accurate? Did I hear you right?
Yeah, slightly less than that, about 150,000 increase.
So maybe that's where I need some more clarification, because like I said, I'm looking at a chart that says we hit 0% increase in mill rate in FY19, but yet the school budget increase was 5.93. So I'm just not able to like reconcile how we hit 0% mill rate.
I think the effect of the reval, the first wave of the reval, throws that out of whack a bit. I'd be pleased to look at that offline, and we can talk about that, Sarah.
Yeah, and I think that what we're trying to get to today is, and again, jumping ahead a little bit in the agenda, is that with the referendum being pushed out to July, that kind of changes the timetable of the budget and where we are. And I think what we're trying to do in this conversation is just get some consensus among this group, whether we think the current tax rate that was delivered in the first submission or our first look of a 5.5% increase, and I think Tom said it well, politically, do we think our taxpayers, given the current environment or the environment that's going to exist, are they going to be comfortable with that, or will they want to see something different? So I think that's sort of the first question. And I see some others with their hands up. So April, I think.
So my question, I think, is for Tom. When we set the joint budget goals for first reading, we had kind of used the 3% mill rate as our metric. And we had said, well, if the school comes in at less than 6 and the town comes in at less than 3, then that should, you know, get us to close to a 3%. Tom, can you tell us a little bit about maybe why we're at 5.5% instead of closer to 3? And I don't want to take the conversation backwards, but it's important
No, that's
for,
important. Yeah, no, that's
for
an
people to
important piece.
understand, I think. You're on mute, Tom.
The difference is we're anticipating only a $10 million increase in valuation, whereas normal it's between 40 and 50 million. And that growth in total valuation is what helps keep that tax rate lower. And there's a number of factors as to why that's the case this year. And I'm pleased to go through those at some point. Again, this probably isn't the time for it, but that's the reason for it, April.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so April, I just said, I mean, in an ideal world, if we'd had our normal evaluation and we didn't have what we're facing now, that ideally, and you guys, you know, both sides, first time we've agreed on goals, we delivered those goals. In an ideal world, that probably would have equated to that 3% or very, very close. But there's just, you know, as Tom has said, the reval last year, there were some abatements that were done that took about $40 million worth of valuation off last year's assessment, which is a little over 1%. So that is a factor that, so if we were at 3, 1% gets us closer to 4. And then the issues become the realities of just our constituents. This isn't business as usual. This is a really unusual time. And you know, there are people that are suffering in our community with loss of incomes and uncertainties and other things. So I think this is our chance to say, and I think going back to the top of the conversation with Tom, our goal, we should try to get, if it is going to go to referendum, what can we do so it gets passed the first time through in July? Because if we go to a second or third ballot, it's going to create some financial issues for the town. And so I think that's where we are. We're just trying to see if there's jointly a way that we can get, and Sarah, I think to answer your questions, if we get a better sense of where we should end up, we can answer those questions about how does the town and the school work toward that goal? And we can answer the questions about what does that mean for it. But it's just, in my humble opinion, and I think the next conversation with the town council, I think people are concerned that the 5.5% combined budgets are going to be a tough sell. So I don't know, John, I think you had your hand up.
I did, but I've been watching Betsy with hers up, so
Oh, okay. That's it. Sorry, go ahead.
You're very kind. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, so, I mean, to Sarah's point and April's, I have a couple of questions. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I kind of feel like what you're saying in a way is the mill rate ultimately is kind of our job. Your job is to know your budget and what to spend on your budget. And, you know, Peter, if both sides came in at a 0% budget, I think it sounds like we're saying that would meet, because it's almost a break even, a 0% mill rate. Is that what you're saying basically? I mean, 150 is just a drop in the bucket. So I just want to clarify that. And then I have a question for Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, it's $200,000, $150,000 more than last year's budget, but it's virtually a flat budget. Yeah.
So we'd be asking the BOE to give us a flat budget and what that would look like. So I had a question for Kate, which was, so I'm sorry that I wasn't able to attend all the workshops, and I've been trying to catch up on the videos, but I know one I was in, you described the way that you build the budget kind of in a layered way in terms of, you know, if we get this, it will cost this. If we get this, it will cost that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but could you briefly describe, like, do you have a baseline that you start with? Is it 0 and then you add to it? Or I'm just trying to understand how, if we said today, school board, administration on the town side, come back with a 0% budget so we can see what that pain looks like, because it's one thing to say a number, it's a whole nother thing to see what all gets cut. How much work would that be? And how difficult would that be? So I guess my question is first to you, Kate, or Peter, you're the facilitator. If you'd like to direct that a different direction, I got my question out. Thank you.
Kate, do you want to?
So if I'm understanding your question, Betsy, we do talk about what we call level services budget, which is essentially our starting point. We do go line by line with each administrator in each department and talk about what's in their budget and what needs to change for the coming year, what they can shift, what they can reallocate, and what they need to keep going in the same direction. The difficulty with that is that the level services budget is really 80% people, and all but about, I would say, 30 people in the school department are part of a collective bargaining agreement, which means that we have contracts in place or we have contracts under negotiation. So for the personnel piece, we're simply plugging in who's here working, what they're doing, what step they're on, what level they're at in their particular bargaining agreement, and assuming that they're going to stay on for next year in that job. So to cut way ahead on your, I think the point that you're making is that, yes, we could go back and look at level services, but even that's where the bulk of our increase in our budget comes from. It's not added things, it's those personnel costs.
Okay, so to get to 0% increase on the budget, you would have to go back and look at level services. Is that accurate or not?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alicia, your hand's been up for a while.
Thank you. I just, for the school side to hear, for us to go to 0 is frightening, because I mean, when Kate talks about that level services, I mean, actually that will be an increase. And so there's an increase in need for student need and student growth. And then there are the contracts that have been negotiated. And so to come at a 0%, we're going to be going backwards. And I'm just really worried about getting back into that place after we've started to dig ourselves out of those cuts. And that's taken a long time, and at the expense of other investments, including some of the safety and security issues that we need to invest in for our schools, combined with the fact that the school doesn't have revenue to play with where the town does. And so it's really devastating, and I know it is for the entire town, but it's really devastating for the schools. And it's that analysis is really scary to me about the potential devastation that we would have. I don't know what's better, but a thought of an incremental reduction is, to me, is a lot less scary, because then we can sort of see where we would be versus the 0%.
Yeah, and I think there may be a suggestion, but John, I think I saw your hand. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I put it up. I didn't hold it up though, but
Okay.
So I guess I'll just comment. To your original question, I think 5.5% to 6% increase on the mill rate is, in my view anyway, it's too high. It's not something that I could support. I think we have a lot of work to do to bring that way down. Now, whether it's a 0 target or not, I can't say that right now. I think kind of the ball's in our court to go through and do our job and look through the gross budget and the revenue estimates and see if there's things that we can make adjustments to, and hopefully with advice from staff as well, to get close to 0. Whether it's 0 or 1 or 2%, I don't know, but that's kind of where I see it coming in right now. So I guess that's where I'm at. I'm anxious to get started, but I'm hesitant to throw out an arbitrary target until I understand more of the details about what's behind the numbers.
Yeah, can I try something on for size? I mean, one of the suggestions was, Alicia, I mean, great points. And I think, similar on the municipal side, it's, I think last year when we got to this point, it's a real issue. I mean, at this point, salaries make up such a huge piece of our numbers that's a consideration for all of us. And one one suggestion, the way that we have approached the municipal budget in prior years is whatever the target is. Tom, usually what he'll do is he'll meet the target, but then he'll bring forth suggestions saying, please understand that with this target, these are either things the town can no longer do, so it's going to reduce services, or this is what he thinks he needs, whether it's a public safety issue, whatever. One of the suggestions is it possible for all of us to collectively say, if we start at that zero base, which I know I hear your concerns, and then kind of look at what's a better, a better, a best, better, or good, better, best sort of budget. And we get to look and make decisions as a community about what are the things that we need to invest in as a community that will get us somewhere north of zero. But I think, based on where we are, given the community, given the people, and frankly, there's two concerns about next fall. One is setting the tax rate. And the second concern is going to be once we set the tax rate, are we going to be able to collect all the taxes? Are we going to have people that are able to pay their existing real estate tax bill? Given that I know a family recently that's lost 4 incomes in the family. I mean, that's real. So I think this is not like any other time we have ever faced as a community, as a state, as a country. We are in, this is not business as usual. This is a different time. We have to find a way we can navigate in our community that we take the finite resources we have and how do we best use them? And I think we either can kind of come to the plate, and part of this conversation is, how do we do that? We can kind of go into our corners and do it, or is there a role for the joint finance committees to try to find a way that we can answer this rubric about how do we go from where we are? And I think John so eloquently stated it, and I think we'll probably hear more in our workshop that follows this, but I think the initial sort of feeling of the town council is, a 5.5% overall tax rate at this point would be really hard for any of us to support. We need to be somewhere south of this. And I think John has so eloquently said, instead of trying to take the number and find things to take out, you folks know the budget best. How do we start from a base and add back to that budget the things that we collectively think the community needs the most? We've got to get from where we are to someplace different. And I'm looking for this group to say, how do we do that collectively? What's the best way to work together? Sarah, is that
just chime in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Tom, were you saying something?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I hear what you're saying, John and Peter, about the 5.5. I think we need to be careful the way we frame that, though, because that was never the goal. The goal was always 3%, and that was at second reading. And that was never the goal for first reading. And I don't think that anybody on this call or anyone listening would argue that in these times 5.5 is appropriate. So maybe just like an alternative suggestion is, what if we, like, as a next step, just go to what our goal was? What does 3% look like? And then maybe we can go from there, because that was already something that we probably were going to do as a next step, and we can just put that into overdrive and do that sooner than we were going to do it. But Kate, I'm going to ask you to articulate this probably better than I can. 0% for us is actually taking things away. Even for us to get from FY20 to FY21 and level services is an increase in $2 million. That's just to do the majority of the personnel, like Kate was saying.
Right.
So a 0% budget increase for the school, for us to start talking about that and putting that out there publicly as even an option, could be pretty detrimental to some of the, emotionally, to the people in town, because that's obvious of what that means. And
Yeah,
Kate, I don't know if you maybe want to elaborate. I just want to make sure that people understand that a 0% for the school is really a difficult conversation to have.
Right, and I hear what Sarah's saying, and I get that people think it would be a cool exercise and probably very informative to do some modeling of what that would look like. But Sarah's absolutely right about, $2 million of that increase in our budget is level services. And so if you start saying things like we're going to go to zero on level services, then you're starting to talk about human beings and their jobs. And that number just flat out represents about 25 teachers. And so it could get pretty emotional pretty quickly if we were to start there. And, I'm certainly not going to say what we should or shouldn't do, but I do agree with Sarah's worry about how that presents to our staff.
Yeah,
Can I follow up with Kate? Kate, how are you standing year to date? Are there any increases to fund balances that we can expect through the remainder of this fiscal year due to the closures?
I think we'll be able to recoup a little bit more than what I expected, but we've already got $300,000 used as fund balance revenue in FY21, and we only have 200,000, less than 200,000 in the bank right now. So I was counting on making up $200,000 to $300,000 this year. I'm guessing it'll be more than that, but I don't think it will be drastically more because remember, we're still paying everybody. Where all of our regular staff is still receiving pay and benefits. And so the savings that we'll recoup would be in areas like supplies, that most of which are already purchased for the year for school, and utilities and transportation. And there'll be places where we'll save that'll be unexpected, but I don't expect it to be a huge order of magnitude more than what we're used to.
Have we looked at, I know on the town side, Tom, you could probably speak to this. We furloughed non-essential employees with the understanding that there's increased unemployment benefits, I think, available to them. Is that something that's been looked at on the school side?
We can't do that. The governor has ordered us to pay all employees. And that's not to say subs or spares or folks like that, but any regular employee that's on the school payroll must continue to be paid under the law right now.
Yeah, and just to speak for the town side, we've taken, and I can put a chronology together, but it's over 2 weeks ago, we put a hiring freeze on for any vacant positions. There's a couple of exceptions, but in large part, it's a freeze across the board. And we have furloughed all permanent part-time employees. We are currently evaluating what the next wave looks like. If this, this outlook was to take us through April, but if this continues beyond that, this is not sustainable. And so we need to do the next level of steps. And I'm confident we'll have a plan in place if and when that requirement comes. The strategy there obviously is to save as much money we can this year to put it forward to next if that's what it requires. And that's not going to be the answer, but that will be part of the answer, I think.
Tom, I should know this, but do you have fund balance used already as revenue in your FY21 budget?
No, thankfully, I think this is our 10th year where we do not use fund balance at all for budget purposes.
Right.
As I said, back in 2008, we used a huge chunk to keep the tax rate flat, and we're still clawing our way out of that hole.
And plus there's a consideration as longer term, as we look out for borrowings, if we are going to do a new school, if you dip into fund balances, we've been told by our underwriters and bond writers that can impact the future rates that you get on the bonds. So we've really tried to build our reserves back up and not dip into them. So
true. Just a final point. I see Betsy's hand up. True, Peter, and I could not agree more. But by the same token, fund balance, this is exactly what it's for. Frankly,
yeah, that's true.
It is for the sort of catastrophe that you'd never see coming. And
true.
Here we are in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Betsy?
So the governor has extended to May 15th. I think I just saw that headline. But I want to, I definitely hear and understand about the level of services. And I definitely appreciate those descriptions. I guess the only thing I'm wondering, there seems to be a viewpoint that if we even looked at that number, that would cause a lot of problems. I'm wondering if that would be an instructive view for the public to see what it would mean to go to that level in order to build support back up. I'm really not weighing in on that one way or the other, but I think there's an alternative view that you could say, if we do go there and people see, I think Kate mentioned, and I certainly wouldn't hold you to this, Kate, but off the top of her head, 25 teachers, things like that. What does that look like? What does it mean? I mean, and we're talking about the school, but there's pain on the town side too. If we were to go to that, Tom has been through the budget with a fine tooth comb. At this point, maybe, certainly the council hasn't, so I'm not saying there's not a lot more questions that we have on it. I mean, it's round one for us as well, but, a 0% budget on the town side is also going to mean, pain. But I'm just wondering if that's something that we owe at least our residents. Again, we don't want to go to past ground. And I know the reval was really mixed. Some people got a reduction in their taxes, but 60% of Scarborough got an increase in their taxes of 10% or more, and some people got an increase of 20, 30, 40. I talked to an older lady the other day that got a 54% tax increase last year. So this was already going to be a real pain point. So I think. Do we think we've got reasonable folks? I mean, that's the wrong terminology, but I guess it just kind of depends on what do we feel we need for public input and how much input we want and need to look at. I think what Peter said, good, better, best. I might say bad, not as bad, and really not as bad, or some other terminology much better than that. So that's kind of where I'm at. I guess I'm not quite convinced yet that looking at level services is a really bad idea. That's just where I'm at.
I think I saw April.
And I'm sorry, wait, really quick. I used the wrong term, level services. I'm at zero based. So sorry, thank you.
April?
Kate, you can go if it is a more natural conversation.
What's that?
No, I was only going to say that, I'm sorry, talking over you guys. I was only going to say that I certainly didn't mean to indicate that we wouldn't be looking at our level services budget. We're going to be doing that anyway. We're not saying that anything is off limits. I think what we're trying to say is that the order of magnitude of a reduction to get us to zero would be pretty drastic, and that we would want to be very careful about how we describe that to the folks that work with us right now.
Yeah, hugely helpful. Thank you.
So I had two things I wanted to say. One was just quickly to circle back. We're paying our employees because they're working. So just for anybody who's listening and for this group's consideration, part of the governor's order is that we pay our employees, but our employees are working. And then the second thing I wanted to say was, we as a group, also another thing that I think we really need to weigh and to consider is how we're viewing this year's budget in terms of whether we are viewing this as a reduction or whether we're viewing this as a relief package to the taxpayers this year. Because what we know historically is that when we make a significant reduction, and whether that means staff on the school side or programs, we then spend the next 10 years trying to, claw our way back to where we were today. And so what I'm really concerned about is that the drastic measures that we're going to need to take to get down to a 0% or, a slightly above 0% mill rate, those are going to take the school department a really long time to recover from that. And so are people in this group and the town thinking of this as, a one-time fix, and we can tighten the belts and reduce staff and do the things we need to do this year, but then people are going to be more open to a conversation next year where we're going to reinstate all of these positions or refund these programs, because I need to know something like that to inform my decision on where my priorities are for taking things out of the budget.
I mean, I can speak. I think this is absolutely more of the latter. This is, I mean, there are extraordinary measures that are taking place all over, both from national governments and state governments and others. This is a relief recognition that we have people that in our community that are down and out and hurting. And what can we do? This isn't business as usual. This has to be, how can we provide the services that we need to provide and at the same time be really sensitive to where they are? I mean, hopefully, if you believe the projections, there's a year from now, we should be back to a robust economy. And frankly, we're not going to have some of the evaluation issues and other things. So I'll welcome, we're going to have this conversation in the following meeting. But Betsy and John, from at least the town council perspective, I think this is an unusual event that we need to be sensitive as some type of relief package to where folks are.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of said this, I think, at the last meeting, but I'm very aware and conscious of trying to minimize the impact on staff that we have. That's kind of my number one goal, is to try to protect that. And I do think it'll be a short term. So there's a lot of things contributing to why we're in this situation this year. The biggest one being the pandemic, but there are other things that were going to make it a challenging year for us anyways. So I guess I'm back to, I don't have a number, April. I don't, from a personal standpoint, I'm not targeting layoffs to get to where we need to be. That's why I'm probably more in the 1% to 2% range. But what I guess what would be helpful for me is from a school board's perspective, would you prefer to get guidance from the council about a number that we feel would help us get to where we need to be from a taxpayer perspective? Or would you prefer to go through your process with the budget and see what opportunities there might be there and come back to us? I guess that would be helpful for me and for some, I think, future conversations that we'll have.
Great question.
And if we're answering April's question, to me, it's an anomaly year. I mean, and we'd hope to recover out of this. And I know, we're not talking about revenues, and unfortunately, neither is the state. And to the best of my knowledge, and maybe Tom could say otherwise, I don't even know if there's been any economic councils pulled together. I do think I understand that there will be money for schools. I don't know what it's for or how it works. That's kind of why Peter's idea of the 3-level budget, so that we could plug in revenues when and if they come. I think, based on COVID and this shutting down, based on my research, anything we get is going to come from the state. But the state is not got sales tax right now through May 15th. So are we even going to lose further revenue? I hope not. But I think, to me, the idea of the 3 levels of budget would be to be able to watch the situation unfold, understand where the pain points are, and then plug in revenue as it happens. And then, there's a lot of economic stimulus out there. I guess maybe I'm a little more in the optimistic camp. I'm hoping this isn't going to be as devastating as we think. I think we've taken a wise move on the council side to not start the clock for the budget. And, no, we've got things to do in the schools. We've got things to do in the town. And this is a reaction to what's happening right now. That's my take on it, April.
Alicia, I think your hand was up. Sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate John's inquiry, and I obviously can't speak for the group, but for myself, I would appreciate the guidance, because I think that it would be less harmful to morale to actually have that guidance. And my thought is, maybe if we could use that as like a first reading plus, you give us some guidance, we go back and do some work, and then come back and you could see the impact, and we could have a conversation then about you know, if there's anything we can do, or if the town's um, second goal comes back and impacts that differently. I think that that could be beneficial.
How do others think about that? April and Sarah, what do you guys think about John's suggestion?
Yeah, I would, I agree. Although I would hope that when you guys would come up with that goal, you would take some of the feedback that we've been giving to you in this session into consideration in terms of what that target would be. But also I would defer to Kate and Sandy and Diane as to sort of what they think is the best approach.
I think honestly, it does put the heat on the council. So of course I like that, right? Not really. I don't.
That's why we get the big bucks, right?
Yeah, right. And I think it could be a combination. I mean, I think
Say
we're
what?
all here
Sandy, I
knowing
missed
that
that.
it's a very different time than we were 2 months ago. I think data drives decisions. And I think if we look at the data of the reductions, that will help inform us on how far we want to go. At that point in time, we'll know how far down we came. I see it sort of like in layers. I'm very mindful of trying to work from our brains and not from our emotions, and to lead that in our community so that people can make informed decisions. And I know this is really delicate work, and I know that we don't want to divide one group against the other group. So we're in this all together, and I guess that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. April, Diane, Kate?
Yeah, to speak to Sandy's point, you know, doing it in layers, I think, you know, that's certainly a reasonable expectation and a logical way for me to think about doing this. That being said, the budget proposal, the investment proposal that Kate presented, this is available, you know, on our website and everywhere. But it really is broken down into layers. It tells us exactly what we're going to need for our staff, for our contractual agreements as of the first day of school. It tells us what we need in terms of if we have students who have required services that we do not have a choice. We have to have the staff to support those students. So we know that number. And then we know beyond that what our individual investments that we had planned to make for this coming year are going to be. And those have been prioritized for us by our building leads and our leadership council. So for me, you know, everything I need to know in terms of, you know, what is in this year's budget and what we're looking at reducing is all already available. And that's not to say that our administrators won't have priorities that they would like to let the school board know about. But for me, you know, in terms of guidance from the town council, I think we do need to know what the expectation of the town council is in terms of how deep to go. You know, if we have a tier 1 and a tier 2 and a tier 3, you know, some parameters on what those tiers look like. And, you know, that's not mysterious work, I guess is the word I'm going to use. We have, you know, Kate has a handle and has presented all of that to the board already. And so, you know, it's more a matter of also presenting what the town council would like to see, because we're just one department that you guys have to look at.
Great. Diane, I think your hand was up.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, I think as we go through this entire process, we need to be really thoughtful about what is that cost benefit analysis. I understand that we're trying to get to a certain target number, but we also have to be really mindful about, you know, we can achieve a certain amount of savings, but then we have to be really explicit about, and that's what, and this is what it's going to mean. This is how the services that we're able to provide are going to be affected, because for us to assume that there aren't going to be deep effects for our students, when we're speaking about the magnitude that we are. I just think we need to be brutally honest about that.
Kate, you want to put your hand up, Kate, or no?
I'm fine with whatever everybody else thinks. We'll make it work.
Tom?
Just from my perspective, the sooner you tell me what the target is, the better. Yeah, and that's just my own personal opinion. I respect everything that's being said, and I can appreciate why they would say it. I just tend to rather know my target and have as much time as I can to understand what it's going to take to get there. It's probably worth noting to this group, and I don't want to get ahead of the council's discussion, but in view of the fact that the primary election date is in fact been moved to July 14th, I'll be strongly recommending to the council that we take advantage of that time. And the extra 2 or 3 weeks may not tell us anything, but it may tell us a lot. So why not preserve that? And so what that would mean, in effect, would be to table or postpone the first reading scheduled for tomorrow night till a date in the future. I threw out May 6th, but those are points of discussion that the council's going to have. So we'll be buying some time and not start the budget process on schedule.
So sort of one last question for this group as we're kind of coming up on the hour. So if the sort of the basis of the conversation sounded like some guidance from the town council would be helpful, April, like the way you kind of summarized tier 1, 2, and 3 or something along those lines. And so now the question becomes, how do you, if the town council kind of sets those guidelines, do you want to work through it as a joint finance? Do you want to work through it? You kind of go back and bring it forth? Any ideas about what's the best process to try to fill in those numbers for whatever that guidance is?
I mean, I'll just speak for myself, and Alicia and April, you guys can chime in if you disagree, but I guess I would just go back to what April said, and that we can share this with you, this documentation, and hopefully, I mean, this is what's in this document, the investment proposal, which we can probably send to you right away so you guys can have it to reference during your workshop after this, is what we would sort of vouch for. And that information is already in there. So I think as long as you guys are utilizing that to sort of help come up with some of your numbers, I don't know if we need to belabor it at this point. But yes, I think generally we would like it to be a collaborative process. I don't know, it sounded like the intention for the workshop after this was for you guys to actually come up with that goal, or maybe that was for the meeting tomorrow night. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I mean, I think actually, I mean, both of these are workshops. So after this is a workshop, which is more a consensus-driven conversation, and then we'll have to figure out what we take with that. I don't think we're going to take a vote tonight on what exactly it is. It's really trying to develop a consensus and then figure out what we do with that.
Is the intention though to set a goal tomorrow night?
Possibly. I think that'll be part of the conversation tonight anyway about what, I mean, we're gonna have the same conversation about what is the process going forward. Tom's already talked about maybe a different schedule and timeline. And so we'll have that conversation, but so yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll take a final action this afternoon, but it's possible I have to talk to the chair. I know the chair is listening on when he wants to factor that into a town council meeting. Yeah, Kate?
So on that process piece and the idea of extending out the process, we have this board meeting on Thursday night where we're supposed to be having a public hearing on the budget. The school budget as proposed and passed in first reading. So we're wondering now whether we should be extending that or deferring that. If we're it feels like we're kind of going back to almost to first reading again, because the council won't be passing the budget in first reading is what I'm hearing for some time yet.
Yeah, I think Tom's proposal that will be discussed this afternoon is whether, we will not do first reading tomorrow night and postpone it to a date certain some other time, I think is part of the conversation.
Do you think it behooves us to postpone the public hearing for the school budget if we sense that it's going to look quite different in the next couple of weeks?
I mean,
For me, I would say yes. Even, yeah, I would say yes. That's my personal opinion.
I mean, you'll know better. I mean, you guys are welcome to listen to the conversation this afternoon for the workshop, and then you'll probably get a pretty good sense of where the town, if you ask for guidance, you'll probably get a good sense of where that consensus is, which will probably inform whether you should go ahead with a public hearing on the numbers that you have, or whether it's better to rework the numbers and use those numbers. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but Alicia?
Thank you. Like Tom, I think that I just want to advocate that I think it will be beneficial to know the target as soon as you're able to provide that. And I'm just wondering what the mechanism will be to share that decisively, because I know at times we've had sort of, you know, the workshops and the finance committees, and sometimes that's, and then the actual council meetings. So, and sometimes those have been different goals. And so what's the process that you're going to use to come up with the final directive?
I think hopefully that will be the outcome of this afternoon's workshop. I mean, that's really, a conversation for the chair to decide how he wants to bring that forward. But I would suspect there'll be some action by the council that will be definitive. And as you said, sooner than later. So I don't know. I know Paul's listening to the conversation, so I'm sure it will be addressed at some point this afternoon.
You want me to jump in Peter, do you want me to jump in with it real quick?
Whoa.
Sure, yeah.
You just pop out of nowhere.
Actually, Peter, I'm going to ask for your help, but I'm pretty sure we don't usually actually codify this or vote on it. I think our budget goals are usually set in the workshop format in previous years. So I would assume that the objective today would be to walk out of there with a good consensus on what the budget goals are. I feel like those should be enough to give everybody the framework to work within, unless as a body we can't come to those. But Peter, I think in the past, right, we've essentially done workshop formats to set these goals. We haven't necessarily voted on them. Is that correct?
I think it's, the answer is always gray. I think in the past, the finance committees have worked on them. We've made recommendations. They go and they're endorsed, if you will. I'm not sure it's an official vote. What is it, a non-action item, Tom? Sometimes we do at the town council level.
No, I think that they're usually wrapped up into your overall council goals. There's often a different process to establish the budget goal, but it's usually formally adopted by council. There's no requirement to do so, but we do it just to make sure it's codified and clear for everyone.
And I would guess, Paul, based on this conversation, what I'm hearing is it would be really helpful to the Board of Education as they think about what they need to do and some of the relationship issues and other things. They would like the town council to become definitive. That would make their jobs easier, it sounds like. So so I guess it's what the other town council members feel comfortable with.
Okay, yeah, so we can decide that in the next hour. Yeah. So.
Peter, if I just can, so I guess I'm thinking about it slightly differently. I agree with Paul in that I don't necessarily see us codifying a new target, although we're probably going to reach a consensus that our original goal of less than 3% is not appropriate anymore. And then we go through the process, right? So we have our first read, which there's an opportunity to amend there. And then we have a public hearing, and eventually we're going to get to a second read where that's where we're going to make some of the final adjustments. And I think I caution against anything too direct early on, because it's going to be a moving target as we get closer to the middle of June, when some of the revenue numbers become more clear, some of the expenses become more clear. So I guess I just wanted to share that.
So Alicia, great question. We'll at least have an answer for you at the end of it, what the town council action will or will not be. So if that, I know that's not helpful in this moment, but hopefully after the next hour, it'll be clearer.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, do you guys feel like you have all the information you need from us though, in order to make an informed decision from like the school board's perspective in terms of how the process should run?
I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect world and we had an hour, but I mean, I think we've heard your concerns and those will be factored into the conversation this afternoon. Then I think it's a huddle after that and how do we move forward?
Perfect.
Paul, do you have any, Diane, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other piece of information in regards to potential cuts. If we are talking about staff cuts on the school side, we do have a legal obligation to notify by May 1st. And so that is a really looming timeline for us if we were to have to consider a reduction in force.
Thank you.
Peter, there's one public comment. Would you like me to have it now?
Yeah, I was just gonna turn to you, Paul.
Sure. Mr. Gates, if you're still there, I'm going to allow you to talk. You just have to unmute your mic as soon as I allow you to talk.
Thank you very much. Member of the community, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
It's Marvin Gates, 423 Black Point Road. I've listened to the last couple of town council meetings. Very much appreciate and respect everything that all of you are doing. Very clear. My 2 cents is all I have to offer, and it is, and I'm sure you're hearing from constituents different numbers. I think that with the future uncertain and with the present, let's just say for our fixed income people has been reduced by 1/3 their income on their mutual funds, et cetera. It would strike me as a fair target that the 3% became 2%, a 1/3 reduction. I'm sure lots of people would like more than that, meaning less than that. But my 2 cents are, if you were to establish 2% or less sooner rather than later, you would have public support. And obviously, the more you can do, the better. So a hard number from the public, this public member, is 2%. And that would be a great relief to hear, again, sooner rather than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it.
So I think with that, I think we're a little bit over time, but it was a tough conversation. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Paul, I'm not quite sure the mechanism to transition to the next. Is it just, we just stay on?
Yeah, let's just all stay on, and then I'll just move the others in the room to attendees, and or they can do what we just did and just turn their mics and their video off. That's fine with me too. So does anybody want me to boot them to an attendee, or do you just want to stay with your mic and video off, or doesn't matter to any of you guys?
Doesn't matter.
I assume you're sticking around, right? So
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Paul,
Thanks for including
Thank
us
you
in the
very much.
conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Paul, can we
Appreciate
have a 2-minute break?
yep, yeah. Let's reconvene. Let's start this at 4:10. How's that sound? And then we'll run 10 minutes late.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sandy, do you want me to? Oh, he's gone. That was easy. Okay.
beautiful day out there.
I know, it's supposed to be 60 or so outside.
Oh, ticks are out.
Yep. There's hope. Spring's coming.
Greetings.
Hey, Don.
Hi. It was a great day for clamming today. I just thought I'd report. Very good low tide.
Yeah, I saw. I mean, I look out. There were 3 or 4 guys down here at the end of Winnick's Neck.
It takes longer to shuck the clams than it does to dig them. I will just
Really?
Yeah.
God, that looks like hard work, though. Those guys are like bent over from their waist for hours.
Yeah, those guys say, yeah, the surf clammers they have it a lot easier, you know. Yeah, those guys that dig those soft shell clams are, yeah, that's real work.
How was the social distancing today down there, Don?
It was very good. It was
Good.
very good. I maintained 2 meters at all times.
Not you, in general, the populace.
It was a light traffic. A light traffic day. It's always about me. You must know that.
Now, where's Jean Marie today?
This is a picture of Western Beach.
Nice.
I do have one public comment to read at the end. If somebody just wants to remind me, I just want to make sure I'm saying it out loud to all of you, so you can remind me if I.
Oh yeah, I'm going to remember. Not.
You want to start with it?
Yeah, I can. I can absolutely start with it. That's fine. Who we went on Tom?
Yeah.
Paul, was it a public comment from the last meeting?
Yeah, it's kind of both. So I'll read it now. That's completely fine. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so we're back at the workshop here. I'm going to, before we get started, I'm going to just read, there was one public comment written via email. And as Peter Hayes mentioned at the top of last meeting, moving forward, I have no problems if at any of our meetings, if anybody wants to submit their public comment through email directly to town council, it's very easy for me to access. Since we're in this format, my computer is up in front of me. So I'm going to read it. Bear with me because I have to switch my screen. And this is, I'm going to read it in the form. It's a form of a letter to the editor. So I'll read it as it is. It says to all employees of Scarborough Public Schools, do what the town council and board of education have failed to do. Reduce the proposed increase in the school spending of 2021. The proposed 5.6 increase in educational spending is totally unrealistic in today's new normal. You are important employees and citizens of our community. You are part of, not part from the community. You are where 55% of the tax dollars go each year, which is an important reason Scarborough has a top 10 school system. Young or old, we're all proud of this. Wage earners of all types are under tremendous financial pressure, temporary and for many long-term loss of wages and jobs. Many of you, practically speaking, permanent jobs, excuse me, I ruined the inflection there, so let me do that one more time. Sorry, many of you have, practically speaking, permanent jobs and guaranteed salaries and generous benefit packages. We as a community have collectively made that commitment, and I'm not suggesting it be taken away or degraded. Now the citizens of Scarborough have to, quote, ask for you. At minimum, freeze your wages and benefits. Freeze them at the levels paid of June 30th, 2020 through August 31, 2021. The towns and state's revenues are where your salaries come from will be reduced by, the town and state's revenues where your salaries come from will be reduced by many millions of dollars this year and in future years. Do what the town council and board of education have failed to do. Reduce the proposed increase in the school spending of 2021. Be heroes to the taxpayers of Scarborough. That is submitted by Larry Hartwell, which I do not have Mr. Hartwell's address in front of me, but I'm sure we can find it. And I apologize to Mr. Hartwell for it's a very small font on my computer, so I apologize if I bungled any of that. With that being said, I actually, for simplicity purposes, Peter and I discussed, I'm actually going to let Peter chair this workshop simply because he has been, I feel like it's going to flow a lot easier, and he is the chair of the finance committee, and ultimately the finance committee is where a lot of this will trickle up to us. Peter, without objections, are you still up for the
Sure. Yep.
Up for the challenge? Okay.
But I look at it as kind of just a group conversation. Maybe a great starting point is, I think most of you may have listened in. How many did all of you listen into the workshop we just had, the joint finance committees? Don, I saw you there. Ken, everybody listened in? So, so I think a quick summary of it, we did have a conversation. I think they are, the first question we asked is, where are we? I think, I think they heard, at least from us, the town finance committee, that again, just as Larry suggested, the 5.5% increase is going to be tough. We had, a long conversation. They shared a lot of things with us. We had gotten to the end. I think John asked a great question just around what would be helpful to them as they look at the pathway forward of how we go from where we are to something we think will be embraced by our community. And I think they asked for some guidance from us, from the town council, about what that should look like. So I think that's probably one discussion point for us this evening. And even as we had that conversation, I think there's some differences in how each one of us might feel about that. So that's sort of topic one. And then I think topic two will really be around what will be our process going forward. I think Tom's got some suggestions now that the referendum's been pushed out to July 14th. What does that mean for our process? Do we want to look at making some changes? So I think those are two of the major discussion points tonight. Anybody else have anything that we need to kind of address? Yeah, Don?
Yeah, I may not have heard this correctly, but I did hear some, and I don't know if this was the consensus at the end or not, but I did essentially hear people say that they could not abide with a 0% target, that they in fact could not only not abide with it, but they didn't want to do the work to model it. I mean, that's kind of what I heard, because people felt that that was just not going to be acceptable. It would have far-reaching effects, and it would require years to recoup those reductions. So I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to stand corrected if I did not filter that properly, but that I did hear that.
Yeah, and Don, I'll take a stab, and I know Betsy's got her hand up. I would say certainly that was an expression by some. I wouldn't say it was necessarily the consensus. I think they raised a lot of concern about what that might mean.
Yeah.
They certainly wanted all of us to be considerate of and think about.
Right.
I heard others, I think more of the consensus was, and I could be just generalizing, but I think what even most of them are saying is, at this point, they want, I think someone used the term, they really want us to take the bullets. They want the town council to be somewhat definitive about what we're thinking. That makes it easier for that. I know, Don, I'm trying to, but what I did hear the consensus, I think, and we proposed it in different language, good, better, best, or not so bad, or bad, not so bad. And I heard something we might be able to work with is, I think what was put out there, they could work with a tier 1 target, a tier 2 target, and a tier 3 target. So food for thought. And anybody else?
I mean, I'm happy with working with that. The thing that makes me very unhappy is that I hear year after year, we want you to give us guidance. It basically means they want us to be the bad guy. We're the bad guy every year. So that is a fact. That's our role. That's why, we were elected to try to represent the public and make decisions in their best interests. So, but what bothers me though is what I keep hearing, well, we don't want to do it and we can't do certain things. We can't look at this, we can't look at that. If we need to make changes to staff, we got to do it by May 1. Oh, we can't, by the way, you can't lay off anybody, even though maybe bus drivers aren't working. These kinds of things really do bother me from a process standpoint. I mean, I have a deeper problem with it ideologically, but I have a serious problem with that from a process standpoint, given in particular the times that we're in. So I'm all in favor of doing a good, better, best, or lousy, terrible, horrible, levels of guidance. But I think, we're put in this box of tell us where we need to be, tell us where we need to cut. And oh, by the way, we don't want your input on line item detail. So I do feel tasked, but I don't feel enabled. Let me just put it that way. So I want this to be something to do together, and I want them to help us understand where and how. I don't want to be put in a position of telling them what to do and then, owning that. In the end of the day, something we should all own and all arrive at together. So.
Betsy, I saw your hand up. Did you?
Yeah, it was in response to your question, but I'm just going to defer
and I have some
until
numbers in mind. I mean, I have some numbers that I think we could get. So I don't want to jump right into it, but I think we have, past
until I understand where we are in the agenda, Peter. Thank you.
No.
Yeah, we're having some delays or something in the soundtrack.
I think, Don, you're freezing up, unfortunately.
And you are too, Betsy.
Am I, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we thought you were done.
Sensor's working, I'm afraid.
There's some buffering
Yeah,
issues going on.
When my mouth stopped moving, that's my, sorry. Yeah.
Do you want to try to reconnect, Don?
We've got heavy users on our internet here. So.
Yeah,
I'll try.
You may want to just call in on the telephone if the internet's slow.
Okay.
Or turn your video off. Sometimes turning your video off helps. Your video.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
That's all I hear you now. Yep.
Yep. I just turned my video off. Is that any better?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
So I couldn't tell if Dawn was done, and Betsy, you started to talk, but I think Dawn was still talking. So Dawn, did you get out everything you wanted to get out?
I think I've said enough. Yeah, for the kickoff here. Thank you.
Real quick, a point of order to Betsy and Dawn. If you go down to your screen, there's a where it says participants. That's how you can raise your hand if you need to. So if you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, or you could just pop on and but I'm just letting you know. It's an easy way to raise your hand.
Well, yeah, Paul, it's a great question. I think in the last one, people were just raising their hand when they wanted to speak. So either way is fine. Can I see the raised hands?
Well, no, I was just saying because they don't have any video. Nor, this
gotcha.
obviously works pretty well.
Yes, gotcha. Good point. Yeah, good point. So Betsy, anyway, go ahead. You wanted to say something.
Oddly enough, I don't really have that hand raise thing. I've had that in other Zoom meetings, but I don't have the hand raise thing.
That's fair. Yeah, I'll work on it. Yeah.
So Betsy, did you want to say something? We didn't hear what you said. I think it was all garbled, so we didn't hear what you were contributing.
Said is I was trying to answer your question and that I was going to just wait. I wasn't sure where we were in the agenda. So I retracted my comment to your question to wait to where we were in the agenda.
Okay.
My hand's up. Can you see it?
So is mine.
I see it now. Yes, Jim. I see yours too, Ken. Sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just to cut to the chase, because you guys know how that's how I am. I don't have a problem coming up with a number. I know I was first on the council. We had school boards. We had first school board I was on. I think they brought us like a 12 or 13% increase to the budget, and we were like, no, and we handed it back, and we came up with a number. I know I didn't get back to Peter because I've been mulling over and looking at numbers, and I've also been trying to keep my own businesses afloat and all of that in the meantime with everything. But that being said, I would be really happy if we came up with 2%, increase on the mill rate, which if I did my math right, and I'm looking at Mr. Clucci because he's been helping me with my math sort of, which would be a $2 million cut, further increase, decrease in what we've got here.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think the town is Tom does an excellent job of getting us down to the bone, so to speak. There may be a little bit more, but I think the school needs to come back to the table and we need to give them a number. If I did my math correctly, what we should be directing them to do is to say, look, guys, we're willing to look at a 2.8, maybe a 3% increase over the current budget, but that's what you got to stay with. But anyway, that's just where I'm at, just so you'll know.
So my math jives with yours, Jean Marie, with one.
Oh my God.
I made an adjustment. So the state changed the parameters around the homestead exemption this year from 20 to 25,000. So when you're looking at last year's property value versus this year's, there's a handicap built in there. And right now that is compensated in our other income category because we get reimbursed for it. But I think for the purposes of talking about mill rate changes from year to year, it makes a lot of sense to put that back in. And it's about 400,000 of additional revenue we'll get times our mill rate of 14.7, it's 20 some odd million anyways. But when you add that back in, it turns into about a $2 million gap that we're off to get to a 2% mill rate change.
Yeah.
But Jean Marie, I was confused. So you're at a 2% mill rate change? Is that?
Yeah, I could go with to go up to around $15 per thousand. And I think most taxpayers that I've talked to would be okay with that. I do know taxpayers do have, for obvious reasons, are real concerned about everything that's going on, as am I, as are all of you. But by the same token, I've lived in Scarborough long enough, moved here in 1980, gonna remember 8. And I remember the years in the early 2000s when the town council was real proud of having like 0% increases and whatever, and it boomeranged big time. And there were all these huge, you had to make up for it later. So we got to be really careful balancing what we're doing so that we aren't doing a lot of damage. I am happy that we're going to push back somewhat on our budget timing. I know the feds in the states are looking at I should say the feds are looking at state assistance. The states are potentially looking at municipal assistance. God only knows what it'll look like. But I think we need to operate with the fact that we may or may not see anything. And I'd rather operate that we won't see anything. And then if we get something great, then we can adjust from there. One quick question, Tom, regarding the homestead. When they changed the 25 to 25,000, did they also increase what they're reimbursing to us, and what percent reimbursement is it? I can't remember.
Yes, the reimbursement went up commensurately. So increasing homestead exemption by 5,000 for every qualifying homestead is about a $25 million hit to our valuation right out of the gate. They do compensate by additional level of reimbursement. They're just slightly above 70% reimbursement now. The number escapes me exactly, but it makes us whole.
Okay, thank you. That's it. I'm good.
Thank you. I don't know whose hand, I couldn't tell whose was up first, Dawn or Betsy's, but Betsy, have you got?
I think Kent went before me.
Oh, Ken. All right, Ken.
John, I don't know.
I just wanted to say that I didn't come away from that meeting with the same feeling that Councilor Hamill did. I actually thought the group is in a bind, just like we all are, and are seeking some direction, some guidance from the council. I heard that they were going to go back to their level service budget, see what could be done. And even if we added no new programs, no new teachers, kept everything the same, we're still dealing with a contractual increase of about 6%. So that's going to be the challenge. And I think somewhere along the line, we got to come up with a solution on that. So.
Do you have a range? I mean, how do you feel about, do we give them tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type?
I actually think that's the direction we should go in. I don't know where we are with that yet. And you have to forgive my ignorance. It's my first meeting of this type. I actually thought the workshop, we were going to blow through the municipal side of the budget. It seems to be just a continuation of the prior meeting. So is that what the format is? That way I'll just engage correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was asked for in the prior meeting, and it will lead up to whatever Paul decides to do tomorrow night. But I think what the first meeting, they're kind of asking for guidance from the town council on what process do we want them to kind of, and for Tom too, what are is the 3% goal still valid or not? It's not a 3% goal. What is it? And you've heard Jean Marie articulate sort of where she is. So I think part of this was trying to build consensus among the 7 of us. What is that guidance, if any, that we're going to give to the finance committee, and then talk a little bit about the process. I think those are the 2 sort of goals.
I'm good.
So I'm going to kill my screen because I don't know if I'm breaking up. Do I sound okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it's really difficult to think about the mill rate because there are so many unknown factors right now that go into the mill rate. So I'm thinking budget, and I am really in favor of the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and providing specific ranges that we take a look at and what that means. So my range would be 0, 1, and 2.
And 0. The range would be 0, 1% or 2% is where you are?
Yeah, or 0, 2, and 3. I'm on the fence, but I want to be able to see what that looks like. And the mill rate itself, and the reason just to explain to the school board members, because I also thought the meeting was excellent, and I really appreciate the input, and I thought it was hugely helpful. I mean, at least to me personally, the things that they said and the thoughts that they gave us. The reason I say 0 is because there's a possibility that a 0 budget increase could still result in a higher mill rate than we think. Revenue is really going to be the picture here. We had a conversation, a couple of us today, with a person in the car industry. The Portland Press Herald came out with an article today about the car industry in particular, and some of the services related to that, some of the industry information. We've got folks sending us data on that. That's just one particular aspect. So I'm focused on budget at this point, and then being able to get more information in the picture on the revenue side, so that we can we could pick what budget makes the most sense as we get more information. So I'm definitely for the 3-tier. I'm not for the 0% to cause pain by any way, shape, form, or imagination, and to definitely not to ignore what the school board said. But I do have a concern that even a 0% budget could still be a tax increase on the mill rate.
Okay, thank you. Don, you get your hand up?
Can you hear me okay, or am I going to have to kill the video again? All right, let's try again. So are we talking mill rate or budget increase in terms of our
mill rate?
I think so. Staying with mill rate. So last year at the first reading, we approved a mill rate increase of 3%. That was last year. That was in a normal year, relatively normal year. That was received very, it was really controversial when we did it, but it helped us arrive at a good outcome. This year, in a year that's much different than last year, how can we, in good faith, approve that same approach? I think it's pure insanity. We don't know what we don't know. We basically, have a board of ed that doesn't want to model that unless we ask them to. So my feeling on this is that we should we should approve a 0% increase at first reading. We should have as a high a 3%, and as a low, a reduction of 3%. We simply don't know where it's going to go. It could go up, it could go down. And I don't like cutting schools more, and I really don't like to do that. My top priority is to fund schools and to make sure that we have a tax increase that people can survive. And I frankly, when I hear people saying that, we can't make cuts because we're legislatively not enabled to do that, I have a problem with that. Our track record is a good one, where each year we've dug deep into our own pocket on the municipal side of the house to try to help properly fund the schools. And I'm certain that we are motivated, every one of us, to do the same thing this year. I do not see how, the same old process is going to deliver different results, with all due respect.
Thanks. Anyone else want to volunteer? John, you got thoughts? Paul?
Sure. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I guess if we go back to a mill rate, let's say a reduced mill rate target of 1 to 0, any mill rate target, so to speak, are we going back and saying that that's not very well defined, because then we're going back and asking the school, are we asking the school to make up the entire difference between where we are versus the 2%? I mean, so to me, the school board really wants specific direction for them. So if we say, okay, the goal is now a 1% mill rate increase, are we telling the BOE that they need to make up the entire difference and Tom's budget is fine? Or so I think, in the spirit of the conclusion of your last workshop, what I heard was the BOE wants a really defined framework to work with. So if we say we want a mill rate increase of 1%, that now we have an interaction between Tom and the BOE, or Tom and the school. And I don't know if that's exactly the exercise we're supposed to be doing here. This is like a pre-first reading exercise. So I just feel like it should be more defined specifically for the exercise we're trying to do.
Yeah. And Paul, let me try. I mean, to me, I think this is a two-step process.
Yeah.
The first step process, which is how we originally set the 3% goal, is we said, what do we want the overall mill rate increase to be? And I think that's what we're trying to get some consensus around in this conversation, just overall. Then I think the second conversation, you're right, is then we need to have a conversation about, how do we get there? But the first thing we're trying to determine is, where do we want to get to?
Right.
And we can have a conversation about how we get there. And I think it involves the town and it involves the Board of Education. But we're just trying to, I think we're still at 30,000 mile view. Sounds like 3% might not be the target. It's something different. And this is just trying to see, and there seems to be some zeroing in here on consensus, but just trying to get through that. So.
Right. So, I mean, like a way we might be able to frame this for the BOE is, do we ask them for a zero new investment budget? Is that a baseline, right? Which they would refer to as level services, right? And as April pointed out, you can kind of go through their budget book and see what a zero new investment budget would look like. Do we frame it that way? Because again, I think if we're going to delay, which I want to delay, I think we're all playing this the right way. Us delaying is to give them to not start the clock and to go through a little bit more of an exercise than we usually go through. So we need, if we're going to do good, better, best, or bad, horrible, and not as bad, we should I just feel like we should define them a little bit more than in the context of a mill rate, because otherwise we're just kind of going back through the typical, to Don's point, we're kind of just falling back to a typical process. And if we're going to do that, we might as well do first reading tomorrow and just make second reading as late as possible.
Yeah, I'm not recommending a first reading. I gave those numbers thinking we would follow the process and we would take full advantage of the extra time that we've been granted by the governor, pushing the date back to July 14th. Take full advantage of that, full advantage of the informal process. And that, but however, by the time we get to the first reading, we would be in a range, hopefully, that's going to be acceptable to everybody. And I would in no way, I would never suggest to the school, we're done helping you. I would never suggest that. I would suggest we would go to great lengths on the town side or on the municipal side to do whatever we can and more than we've done in the past. I'm talking about things like freezing all capital expenditures for the town, period. Do we really need another new fire truck? Do we really need another replacement for a staff vehicle? I'm serious. I mean, these are the kinds of things, and this is no knock on the fire department or our essential services and the great work that they're doing. But those are the questions that I believe we need to ask. And if things lighten up, it's not as bad as we think, then we can build it back in. But I think that, that's kind of where we are. And I looked through the budget. I'm not all the way through it yet, but I saw a lot of things on the capital expenditure, list and I know we don't treat it the same way as an actual dollar, spending an actual dollar, but it's actually spending more than $1 when you add in debt service. I think it's time for us to start asking those kinds of questions instead of having the inexorable role of expenditures.
Yeah. So let's, I mean, I think the capital budget is another conversation we need to have, but for Paul, did you land on, are you uncomfortable? It sounds like all we're trying to do is whether it's good, better, best, worse, horrible, whatever. I mean,
yeah. No,
are you uncomfortable putting out any numbers? Is that where you are as a starting point? I mean, I think what we're trying to do is get to a different starting point for first read. And then we're still going to have lots of conversations after that. But
yeah, I'm in favor of the good, better, best model. I mean, like I said, assuming our objective is that, are we going to define good, better, best for them? But I do appreciate the 3-tiered model as a way to give us a reference point going into first reading.
Do you have numbers to put in there, or are you not comfortable putting numbers?
Well, no, I think, and that's why I was trying to distinguish between the mill rate conversation and what we're bringing to the BOE, so to speak. If you want to talk about what my comfort level of the mill rate is, do I think it should be less than 3%? I absolutely do. But we are literally dataless here, having a conversation about an $80 million budget. And there's a side of me that I think we're trying to extend this process specifically to hopefully make more informed decisions. So I just, if you want me to say, like, do I think a target mill rate increase of 1% to 2% is where I am? Yeah, absolutely. Like off the top of my head, absolutely. Which I think I emailed Peter to you directly.
Okay, good. I got it. John, you've got target range?
I don't think we're that far apart, actually. So I don't know what that means in terms of a good, better, best. I can't touch it. But in terms of starting from a place that's, first of all, equitable between the school and municipality, I want them to be on a level playing field, because the bulk of both budgets are, both gross budgets, I should say, is staff. So I want to make sure that we're being fair there. And then we try to get as low as we can, as I think the objective, but to do that, we have to go through the process. And Don, I've been asking a lot of the same questions as you have, and we're going to have a bunch of finance committee meetings in the coming month or two to flush out some of those details where we can understand the trade-offs between buying a fire truck this year or pushing it off a year or something else that may not have been the right example. For me, if you're looking for a number, I think on a gross budget basis, because there is a lot of uncertainty on the revenue side, I think starting at 3% on the gross side implicitly gets you close to 2% on a net side, on the mill rate. I think that's not a bad place to start. And I would support it, understanding that if they can't do it, then, we can't do it, then we have to have more discussions.
Okay.
So just a caution on gross versus net versus mill rate. So if you want a budget to be as big as you want it to be, gross budget is if I were the school, I'd want to look at the gross budget. The net budget, if you're cutting. So one of them assumes revenues, the other does not. So, I mean, we just got to be careful about which one we're using and explain and I love the way Jean Marie's raising her hand where it covers her face, but just a caution.
Yeah. Yes, Jean Marie, yeah.
I've been had my little blue hand up there. I was trying to do it the right way, but that's right.
I
Just
can't
to
see a little blue hand. I can't, I don't.
Oh, that's how it's showing up on my thing, whatever.
I know, I don't see
Anyway,
it.
I'm doing.
Paul's got the.
Oh, Paul's got
pause
it. Oh,
behind
yeah,
the-
yeah. Okay, sorry. Anyway, again, just to go back, I mean, I gave you my numbers. I
Yeah.
told you I'm looking for a mill rate because I'm used to looking at mill
Yeah.
rate as the bottom line because that's what the taxpayer's looking at. All they care about at the end of the day is how much is my taxes going up.
Right.
And my number of 2.83%, is a target that I would like to see the school board do. And again, that's Jean Marie's thoughts on what the target should be. I wasn't thinking in this bad, worst situation, or however you want to classify it. But I feel very strongly that unless you set a goal for something, you're going to be driving all over the place. It's like going somewhere without a map. So I feel very strongly we at least need to be giving the school board some direction as to what we're thinking. Otherwise, they keep shooting in the dark, and then people get frustrated, people get angry, and it makes it much more difficult in the long run, in my opinion. So as with anything, my numbers aren't cast in stone. It's just my opinion at this point. So I would like to see us as a council head towards at least giving the school board some parameters. I am not hearing from this council that we want to accept their budget as is. I did not hear from the school board that they want us to accept their budget as is. They're talking about going back to the drawing board, but I think to be fair to them, we need to at least give them some parameters so that people aren't wasting their time, spinning their wheels, and feeling frustrated. That's it.
So Ken, Betsy, I see you, but just for a second, Ken, as this has gone around, are you comfortable giving out sort of your parameters, sort of where you are, the range at least of where?
I'll tell you the truth. I don't know how we set where we want to go when we really don't know where we are. And there are just so many unknowns. Whether we're dealing with gross, net, mill rate, it's all the same to me. We don't know where we are. I'd like to see definitely a delay in the first reading, and then take that time between that delay and the first reading to maybe get some. I had asked the chair to have SEDCO come. I don't know what happened to that, but I'd really like to see SEDCO come in and give us an overview of what we're seeing in our local market. We could have MMA come in. We need to become much more informed. We're all like everybody else. We don't know, so we're assuming sometimes the worst, but we really need to get a better handle on it before we decide where we want to go. The only thing I can say for sure is 3% is too high, regardless of what is what.
Okay, that's okay. And I guess, yeah, Betsy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd just like to go back to John's point. And to me, so when we did the joint finance committee, some of that work was definitely done before I came on the finance committee. But I think April described it as the BOE was given a budget target. The town was given a budget target. And then in our workshop for the town council, we set the mill rate. And the BOE delivers us a budget. They don't deliver us a mill rate. And they made the statement today that, they don't take money in. We're the revenue center. They're not the revenue center. So I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the discussion around the mill rate at this point. It feels like we're back, to the point where we're setting budget targets. I think it's a little harder to drive the mill rate right now because of the unknowns that everyone is saying. So I will totally back off this stance, but I guess I would, really like to understand, how do we drive to a mill rate? And could we look at a budget driving, or at least given the BOE tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 budget number targets? I mean, I totally agree with Jean Marie. We have to. I would be for voting. I'm all in favor of giving something very definitive, and I don't mind taking the heat. I don't think anybody, I think everyone is in the same boat with us. So I guess I'm just still really at the place that, you know, I am having a hard time around the mill rate right now, but I definitely feel comfortable on where I think the budget should go. At least for discussion before first read. And I would like to emphasize that, because if we're able to push first read off and we have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 budgets, we may be able to go into first read very obviously with revenue pictures more clear and say, hey, we're going into first read with tier 3 budget. We're going into first read with tier 2 budget. We're going into first read with tier 1 budget. I just think being able for the public to see these different tiers of our budgets and then see how the mill rate plays out. I seem to be alone in this, but this is where I'm at.
Well, let me, you know, I haven't spoken yet. So my perspective after doing this budgets for 6 years, you have to have targets, because if you don't have targets, I mean, I've done budgets all my life. You're going to put in the budget, you know, you're going to make every possible case for the budget. We've said it before, this year is going to be some really tough decisions. And I agree with John. Tom has already shared that he took $1.6 million out of your budget, Tom? And there were some hard choices for Tom to get there. I've done this for several years, and the problem becomes, and rightly so, but for the Board of Education, we don't get to look, or we don't get to have conversations necessarily around their line items. We can't say, no, you can't do X, Y, or Z. What we are looking at is a total net number. So what we need to do is give them guidance saying, this is what we want to see at the first read. And what we've done with Tom, and what we've done in the past, and we've even done it with the Board of Education, I think last year, is at the end of the day, the decision for the school budget is really the taxpayers. They're the ones at the polls that are going to vote up or down. And I had said at the top, I think we have a complication not only of the pandemic that is unknown right now, and the outcomes, and when people are going to return to work and the impact, but secondly, there's the town business that has to be conducted. If Tom cannot set the mill rate, the tax rate by August, the third week of August, we run into cash flow problems for the town, because we need to get the tax bills out so we get them back. If the referendum's not till July 14th, our goal should be to deliver something we can rally the community support around. And I think where we are right now, everybody on this screen has said 5.5 is a no-go. That is, no matter how you split the pie, 5.5% increase in the mill rate's not going to get passed in our estimation. I think that's what I hear people saying. And I can't support a 5.5% increase to our constituents at this point in time. I would be in favor, as we have talked, I think a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 sort of process is what the Board of Education asked for. I think it gives Tom some guidance. And if I heard everybody talk, I think I heard most people say it's under 3. I think the Board of Education, the Finance Committee said they'd be comfortable trying to get to 3. So maybe the first read, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, there seems to be some consensus around, do we ask for a 1 and a 2 and a 3% increase in the mill rate as the starting point for first read? And that's not going to be an easy lift. I mean, it is going to take a while for those decisions to be made about how do they prioritize, how do we prioritize what that means. So I don't know if there's any consensus around that. I think anything else at this point in time, if we can't give them guidance, it's really going to be an ugly process. And so that's sort of where I am. I guess my proposal is to see if there's any consensus. I think there was consensus around 3 tiers. I think there was some consensus that it has to be under 3. There was some that, you know, the Board of Education specifically said 3. So do we do 1, 2, or 3? And with that, I see some hands, so I'm not sure. Tom, I don't think you've weighed in yet, so.
I defer to the council chair first.
Tom, Paul.
You're on mute. Paul, you're on mute.
Paul, you're on mute. You're on mute.
That never happens.
You're still on mute.
You're still on mute.
I'm on mute. That's
That never happens.
Sedco's on mute too. He's never over here. I'm sorry. So I'll go. I guess I'll go. Peter, I completely agree with you. I'm still coming back to the exercise framed in mill rate to me for what we're trying to do as a exercise before first reading. I would prefer just I'm just going to throw out an option to advance the conversation or get shot down. Their current gross budget increase is 5.73%. So I would suggest that they present to us a 0%, 2%, and 4% gross budget increase. We don't know what that's going to look like for a mill rate because there's so much uncertainty. But if they've increased it by 5.7 right now, if we have 0, 2, and 4, that's going to at least start the conversation. And to Betsy's point earlier, and I think it's important that people know what a 0 looks like. And if we do that, then we have 0, 2, and 4. As we go further down the road, we'll start to be able to see where does that look like for a mill rate increase or decrease. And in their capital budget, that's another thing that gets a little bit lost here when we talk about mill rate, because a lot of this capital budget isn't factored in. Their current capital budget's 3.1 million, which is significantly higher than other years. So let's go back and ask for a $1, $2, and $3 million capital budget. And then at least that gives us framework. And then we can drag our feet, so to speak, for these next couple of weeks. And then we can actually see what that actually translates to mill rate. So that would be my proposal, simply because speaking in terms of mill rate, again, my question I'm trying to throw back to the council would be, if we speak in terms of mill rate, are we saying hold Tom's budget exactly the way it is and get to 3%, 2%, and 0%, right? And I think their exercise, that's just for illustrative purposes, for exercise purposes, for us to get a clear picture of what this all means. I would recommend 0, 2, and 4 as the tiers and gross, 1, 2, and 3 million as tiers and capital budget. And I throw that out there as conversation.
Can I ask a technical question, Paul? So when I think about first read, I'm thinking about what is actually included in the agenda packet, where we itemize, this is the appropriation for schools, this is the appropriation for capital split between schools. I'm struggling to figure out how we fit a tiered system into that, how we normally do it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think we would. I think the point of this is to not do that, to get some clarity going into a delayed first read and refine it before we get to first read. So I wouldn't have a first read that has tiers involved.
Okay, you would pick one before first read.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and look, if we pick one tier and that tier gets altered, adjusted up or down, then so be it. So Dawn's been patiently has his
I
little
was going to say, I see Dawn's hand up.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of trying to do what will work for us in terms of a process. I am concerned, however, about we now have 3 different sets of numbers to work with. One that just is focused on budget costs, one that uses mill rate, one that includes gross budget and capital. So I really think I'll go back to what Peter said. Setting goals, very important. Trying to be simple and straightforward in a year that is chaotic, as important, maybe more important. So I don't like interjecting new variables, more variables than have been, that were weighed down with the events, of the past couple of months. So I just say try to, and I don't have a solution for that, but I kind of like going with what people understand and what we've done before. That said, I know we set first and second reading goals coming out of the joint finance committee work. And I think that we need to be flexible with the process and the timing to maximum advantage. So I don't really have an answer to you, but I need to, be overly critical about experimenting. But I like the idea of trying to make it easy for the Board of Ed to work with us to really get creative. When I've gone through these exercises before and you have to tighten budgets, there's a real benefit to getting as many ideas as possible, as much input as possible. And I think we're doing that so far, and I would encourage us to continue with that.
That's it.
Well, I really like the way Paul framed that. That's definitely where I was at. I'd probably do 0, 2, and 3 instead of 0, 2, and 4. I do have one question on what he laid out for the capital, which was, and this will be prior to first read and go into first read with 1. So on page 26 of the budget book, the net appropriation for FY 2021 for all of capital would be 1,188,044. Is that right, Tom? So regardless of what we appropriate, the impact on the overall budget for both school and town is this 1.18 million.
Councillor Gleisten, you have a knack for asking very technical, specific questions without any notice. So allow me just a moment to get oriented here. I believe that is correct, yes.
So I guess the only place that I might differ with Paul, and I see what you're saying, Paul, that the total school department 3 million is, I would just say, however someone determined to get to that budget, that the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which in my case was 0, 2, and 3, in your case was 0, 2, and 4. I could go with that too. I would say, the net, I would have them, leave in the capital that they think is correct, but with the impact on the allocation, or I could go with your method too. But I'm just throwing that out there. But yeah, I'm where Paul is on this, basically with a few minor changes.
I just want to be clear in further response to the question asked. This proposal requires $1.18 million in appropriation in FY21, but it approves a total capital plan of about $7.33 million.
Which is huge.
The balance is to be bonded. And
Right, but in terms of the mill rate, the impact is the 1.18 or 1.19 million, right? Yeah. So the less you borrow, the less will be the impact on the mill rate, for FY21 or whatever we push out. So if we looked at things in that capital budget and said, hey, let's push that out to FY22, that is going to decrease that 1.19 million for each thing that we defer to another year, because we won't be bonding it and we won't need it in the FY21 appropriation. So that was kind of my thought. Instead of setting a capital target, I mean, capital, as Don said, the capital we borrow impacts the mill rate every single year. And for FY21, the new bonding, which we already have the bonding that we can't change, but the new bonding, as I read it, is 1.19 between the school and the town. So I'm still focused on budget. I'm still pretty much where Paul is, with a couple of nuances.
And I guess this is weighing in on Paul's. I'm really reluctant at this point in time to completely change a methodology that we've never used before. I mean, as we know, our community is very interested in this conversation. You've gotten the same emails I have. You've seen the same social media pieces. What people it is confusing for me, the budget, whether we talk about gross expenditures, net expenditures. What I understand and what I care about is especially people that have household budgets that are being impacted. I want to know what my taxes are going to be next year when I go to the polls. And I think by us not focusing on what the tax rate's going to be so people can figure out their impact, we're not doing them a service. And I would say we probably have more definitive answers around the mill rate is going to be Tom's used, what was it, Tom? Cautious, optimistic, and lower
mid-range.
Mid-range, and you had wide variations. I mean, your variation what the mill rate was going to be varied by over a percentage point, I think. You have
that was based on the council's policy. That was 150% and then 50% of expected value.
But this year, you're projecting a much narrower range because you've done a lot of legwork to figure out what the assessed value is going to be. There's not a lot of wiggle room or variation or variable of what the assessed value is going to be if your work's accurate. I'll guarantee you, if we pivot away from talking about mill rate to some other metric, it is going to be a really tough conversation with our community. We've got a short period of time. No matter what number we pick, we've got in my estimation, there's no way we can float at 5.5%. It will never get passed at the polls.
Peter, let me be really clear. I am not talking about changing any of that. What
well, you said net expenditures.
But what I'm talking about is we're trying to lay out a pre-first reading exercise. Our goal of 3% mill rate increase could be 0% mill increase. What I'm trying to lay out is an immediate exercise for the BOE to do before we essentially start our normal process. I would want our budget to always be talked about in mill rate increase for the public. We just don't know what that looks like right now. So
why don't we know what it looks like?
Because our revenue projections are, our revenue projections are incredibly uncertain right now, right? As we have organic growth that has virtually been adjusted down to 10 million. So what I'm not suggesting that we move forward in a budget process with a new set of goals. What I am suggesting is the BOE is saying, and please, everybody correct me if I'm wrong, but we're delaying first reading to not start the clock. And we're doing that because the BOE in good faith has come to us and said, you know what, that makes sense. Time is our friend here. We need to gain some certainty. So before you guys do your official first reading, we'd be willing to rework some of our budget and give you a better understanding and presentation of where we are before we do first reading. So then that allows us the time to get a little more clarity, and we can look at the 3 tiers they bring to us and they say, okay, that's a -1% mill rate increase. That's a 1.4 percent mill increase. We can talk about this and vote on this and first read and second read, all of this in terms of mill rate. But if you give the BOE a mill rate increase right now, that's not the exercise that I thought we were buying ourselves time for, is to just get the conversation started. So when I say these 3 tiers, that would then just be the conversation starters. And then those 3 tiers can be converted to mill rates.
But I'll push back a little bit, Paul. I didn't hear them talking about a different metric. I heard them talking about a 3-tier mill rate target, which is what we've always used. I didn't hear in any of that conversation they were talking about net expenditures.
But I don't think we can, at this stage, we can't talk about this in terms of mill rate because this is like a pre-stage.
This is, I don't understand that. This is the same process we've used. We know pretty much what the state school revenues are going to be. The only revenue numbers that are in play for Tom are excise tax for the most part. So I don't agree that we don't know any more information. We don't have any less information at this point in time that we have in all the other processes. And I don't know. I'm uncomfortable. When you put out those numbers, I have no idea what a 2% net expenditure for the Board of Education is going to deliver in a mill rate. So
right, but we can, I guess, okay. So if we want to talk about in terms of mill rate, it goes back to my original question. Are we telling them that we're freezing Tom's budget and
what I said to you is we haven't decided how it gets allocated yet. All we're trying to do is if there's any agreement among any of us about what the overall mill rate should be, then we can talk about how we get there with the 2 budgets we're looking at.
But shouldn't we do that in a couple of weeks? That's why we're buying ourselves time. Like that's where I'm at.
I thought part of the conversation would be if we can vector to what a mill rate is, that they should tier 1, 2, and 3. Then we can have the conversation that gets to John's point about how do you get equity between Tom's already done some heavy lifting. How do we factor that into the conversation? So I'll let others weigh. I'm just really uncomfortable.
Can I ask a question, Peter? Just a clarifying question. So today, if we said, okay, here's the mill rate, and we asked the BOE to do something, present another budget, what would we be asking them to do? I guess that, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just not quite understanding exactly if we come up with a mill rate, then when we go back to Tom and Tom says, okay, with this mill rate goal, then this is what I need from the school, or so exactly, if we pick a mill rate, what are we asking the school to do? I guess that's just what I'm not quite clear.
Well, here's the problem. If we just come out with a target for the school, as Paul suggests, what are we going to tell Tom? What guidance? You've heard Tom clearly say Tom also wants guidance.
Well, to me, it was the same guidance, budget 0, 1, 2, 3, or, you know, whatever the number comes out to be. It was the same guidance to both the Tom and the schools. That's what I was thinking anyway, but I'm just trying, because we basically said, based on the valuation, the budget and the mill rate conversation is almost the same. I mean, Tom said there's $150,000 difference. So I guess I was just, you know, at that point where if we want to talk mill rate, I'm fine with that. Then I just, like you said, when do we get to step 2 for the BOE and Tom to be able to interpret budget wise? What does that mean? How do we get there? And I'm not saying I know, I'm just asking that question of you. How do you see us getting to translating mill rate to budget?
We've done that before. I mean, the problem right now is it's really hard to see if there's any consensus here at all among anybody. So we can't give numbers to anybody until we can come to some clear. I had thought as this conversation had progressed, tier 1, there was some agreement, or tier 1, 2, and 3. We were talking mill rate. The numbers we got from as we went around the room were anywhere from 0 to, well, there was one less than 0, but the consensus was really around 0 to 3%. You know, I think, Betsy, you had said a starting point is, I think we need to know what are the pain points to get there. I think the public needs to know what the pain points are. I think pivoting to a different metric at this time is confusing at best, but that, you know, I'll defer to others. I see Don here.
Yeah, the whole point of the joint resolution and the targets that the Board of Ed have used in the budget that they are working on, the only one we've seen, the one that has not been received by us, was a trajectory, was a first read in the direction of delivering a 3% mill rate target. So I'm kind of in favor of trying to stick with what we've used so far and not introducing other things. We're trying to set a target. How people get there, you know, this target is what we're trying to achieve. The how you get there is the how. We'll leave the how up to Tom and to the Board of Ed to do that. The one thing that they did also ask for us to do, in addition to providing them direction, the Board of Ed is on target to approve a budget tomorrow evening. I suggest that we tell them, don't do that. Don't approve a budget tomorrow evening. You know, let's postpone that.
Like we have approved it last week.
Our target. Sorry.
I believe they approved it last week.
They're
already
voting on it tomorrow. That's what
No,
they
they
say.
have a public hearing scheduled for Thursday this week. So they did
Okay,
first reading
they
last week.
approved the budget. My point is that we need to set direction for them. They've asked us to tell us what we're looking at. We need to do that. If we can't solve that in this workshop, then on we go and we keep, you know, working it to try to find out what we can get. But I think that we, you know, need to use the process that we've started, do what we have done so far, and potentially push out the dates, and where we can, however imperfect, try to put markers down along the way. So, and I know this is the tough stuff, so I'm not surprised or necessarily upset that we can't, you know, get really clear consensus in one pass at this just minutes after we've heard, you know, feedback from the BOE.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, let me take a slightly different tact. I've been listening intently, and it's really hard to find any true consensus here. Peter, I am entirely on board with you. I think tax rate is what matters. We've been using that terminology consistently for the whole time I've been here, perhaps earlier than that. I think that is what matters to the taxpayer. We on the inside need to translate that into what does it mean in dollars in our budgets, and we can do that easy enough. I might suggest the only commonality I've heard is that it can't be any higher than 3% tax rate increase. Is that fair statement?
Yeah, that's fair.
So one approach would be to take advantage of the 3 weeks or so we potentially have between now and first reading, give clear indication, and we can have conversation of how it's allocated, but clear indication to both the town and the school that there'll be a reduction in the budget in first reading to achieve 3%. That equates to about $1.8 million in reduction. And we have to talk about where that comes from. I don't believe that's enough, but that begins the process. And that I think everyone needs to appreciate there is further right sizing or modification to the budget. And then you've got a full 60 days to sort through what that looks like. Ideally, we start to learn more about the revenue picture. Some of our expense items will come clearer into focus, and that might ease that discussion. So rather than this 3-tier approach, you do what's absolutely obvious to everyone, that 3% is the absolute maximum that can be tolerated as the first step, and then figure it out as we go. And at the end of the day, I will just leave you with the thought, and I say it as much for myself, let's not get paralyzed by this process. We'll do the best we can. Your charter has a process to amend the budget. If we severely miss something, you have a chance to course correct. We're not going to have all the answers we hope we will. We might have some more before the end of the process, but I assure you, I don't assure you, my expectation is that we'll largely still have a lot of uncertainty going forward.
Yeah.
And, that's beyond our control. So I throw that as a suggestion.
Good suggestion. I think it's a great suggestion. I think there's, whether it's 3% or 2%, do folks accept Tom's recommendation? Just by show of hands, maybe where folks are?
Yeah.
And I guess, by show of hands, is it 3% or 2%? So show of hands for 3. Show of hands for 2. So I think if there's a consensus, it's the new sort of consensus is a budget goal of 2% as the starting point for first read, with the understanding that we need to better understand what the ramifications of that is as it relates to services being delivered and, how that impacts staffing and everything else. There may be adjustments we make, as Tom suggests, we get new numbers, but that's a starting point. I have found in past experience, it's easier to add things back in than it is to try to take things out between first and second read. So, Paul?
Well, first, I want to voice my opposition to the consensus. But secondly, if we're going to do that, then we need to define. I would like to define right now what percent of these reductions we're talking about are coming from the school and what percent are coming from Tom. Because again, if we don't define that, are we telling Tom to go in the room with Sandy and figure it out, or are we telling the school to go figure it out?
What can I think that's the second part of the conversation. I'm even sure we have consensus around the first part. That's what we're trying to get. It looked like there was, but Jean Marie?
Well, again, take my math for what it is, because I'm not a mathematician, but I was coming from the premise that the municipal budget is pretty much, I think, good the way it is, but if we can find a little bit more to help out the school, that'd be great. But it would mean a 2.8% increase to the school over their current budget, if I did my math correctly, to come out with a 2% increase in the mill rate.
Okay, so can we, by show of hands again, Paul doesn't think there's a consensus. Let's just show of hands. Is there a consensus, at least for first read? And
No, I think there's a consensus. I just disagree with everybody.
That's okay.
On what you were suggesting.
So I disagree for other reasons with this. So I don't mean to jump the gun here, but That's a slight difference. You know, if we stick with that, it's a, what is it, $1 million something reduction in the budget. I just don't think we're dealing with reality.
No, it's about a $2.5 million reduction.
To deliver a 3% target this year.
2%.
2% is what I heard.
Yeah.
So,
Or increase of revenue, or however it flushes out. But yeah, it's 2.5.
You know, my feeling is this year having any increase in taxes is going to be hard to take. That said, I've heard individuals from town who speak out, you know, to land in the 2% range. But you know, I think this year we need to start asking the tough questions and really questioning, you know, our assumptions around a lot of things. And I think by setting a modest reduction like that, we'll never get at those questions. So that when we're in this position again, heaven forbid, we never will be, you know, at least we'll have been steeled by the experience and know how to deal with a crisis. I just don't think we're, you know, we've come to terms with larger questions like our general spending, you know, how we improve capital, how we spend capital, and those other issues that are really gonna hurt us. And I think we have no data. I think we don't really know where we're trending. So I can't agree with that.
And again, I think Tom makes a great point. What we're trying to get to is just a different starting point. There's still going to be 60 days to work from first read to second read. I think all we're trying to do is give some clearer guidance. This doesn't mean we're not going to question all those other things, especially if things really change between now and then. All I'm trying to do is see, you know, if that's a good starting point that the majority of us feel comfortable with, and then we can figure out what we do with that.
I'm directionally fine with it, but I think that it, you know, we need to, you know, explore the unacceptable. You know, that's a reduction, you know, in the budget. We need to
Can I ask
explore
Councilor
that.
Campbell a question?
Yep.
What would your number be, Don, if we're going with this, like you said, directionally in this direction? What would your number be? And would you want to see, even though it's a little unprecedented, like a 0 and a 2, so we could at least see what 0 looked like? I mean, I still would like to see what 0 looked like, but I'd like to hear, if you were picking a number and none of the rest of us were talking, where would you go?
Well, I'd like a 0 in there someplace, you know, if it's a 0, worst case, if it's a, you know, 1.5% in the middle and 3% best case. But I don't think it makes sense to stay at or very near 3% as the target, as the middle range.
Thank you.
I think there needs to be a 0 in there someplace.
Could I just offer a perspective as one that will have to go through this exercise? I think Kate Bolton made this earlier. This is not an academic exercise. For us to get to 2%, I assure you there'll be significant layoffs, town and school alike. For us to go further than that, it will only get worse. And so we're dealing with real people here. And I would strongly suggest that now more than ever, our community will be looking for and needing services from their schools and from their community. So I'm not sure if it's wise for us to dig really deep and cut really deep when arguably our residents might need us the most.
Let me respond to that. Yeah. We talk about things that are uncontrollable and that we need to maintain level services and that we can never really talk about anything else. Those decisions that have been made around those things, contractual commitments and so forth, are decisions. Those are trade-offs. Those are things that are within our control, not the town council's control, but within the control of the school. And similarly, we have things like that we control on the town side. So accepting those things as givens is, I think that is a faulty argument. And then moving from there to say we can't work the case to see what it looks like, I think is also an abdication of responsibility and authority. You know, and that's not something I'm willing to do as an elected representative. I think we need to look at it. We need to face the hard facts. We need to work the case and see where it is and see what we can do. And it's not, and I know Tom's made tough cuts and hats off to him. He's been, you know, one step ahead of the curve at every turn here, and we appreciate his leadership. And, but I think that the burden continues to fall on us on the municipal side. best case, we're 37% of the gross budget. We're 26% of the net budget. We're the small part of the budget trying to solve every year for the bigger part of the budget. And I know we have revenue sources, but we don't have unlimited funds. And I think we've been I think our track record speaks for itself in terms of the sacrifices we're willing to make, in favor of good schools. So I think it's time for us. I think it's irresponsible for us not to ask and work through the tough questions and the worst cases. I think we're not doing that. And I think we're in denial.
Well, but I think what we're trying to do here is, there's a group of 7 of us. We all have very strong opinions. Again, I just want to remind not only everybody here, everybody's listening, it is just the first read. So Todd, to get to your point, if whatever number we pick, if it's 2 or 3%, I think there's some real value. And Betsy had mentioned this earlier. When people see what that real pain point is, Tom, as you suggest, if that means what you're talking about, that is a great way to try to rally community support to say, that's not something we want, that it's worth that trade-off. But it's in the abstract until we can put it in front of people. So I think there is some value to say, here is the pain. Is a trade-off in the short term worth it in the long term? We don't know the answers to that, but just around this group, I think, and I'll just test it again, I think Tom made a great suggestion. It sounds like the tiers are going to be complicated. Seemed like there was a fair amount of consensus around 2%. Just once again, how many people are comfortable from a consensus point of view? Whatever is decided at the town council tomorrow night is something different. But for now, how many people are comfortable with a conversation around a 2% target?
I would be fine with 2 or 3. Yeah, to start.
Okay.
And we're talking about the mill rate, right?
Yeah, yes, we are. As a starting point, and that's a moving target, we can have that conversation after the first read about what that means and adjustments we make and some of those other things. So I think for what it's worth, that's the consensus. And I know we're over time. I think the 2 other things we wanted to talk about, one is how that's divided between the town and the school. Do we want to address that tonight? Do we want to take it offline and have the joint finance committees figure that out? What's the process for that? Or what's the appetite for that tonight?
I would suggest that this officially moving forward belongs at joint finance. You in the spirit of you guys working together, I think the joint finance needs to hash this out, of course, with staff as well. Yeah, but I don't think us as a 7 I don't think that's our role right now. I think that should be kicked to committee and staff.
Okay, Jean Marie?
I would agree. I would give it back to joint finance because it's got to be hashed out there, and then the superintendent and the town manager, I know in the past have always, those 2 roles have worked together to balance and try to make it work. So I agree with Paul.
So by raise of hands, how many people are comfortable with that? All right, then the last thing to talk about was, Tom, you have or Paul, you have a proposal about where we are in schedules and that type of thing, as far as first read and budget presentation and all that stuff. Was that a conversation for here, or?
I think we can get through it pretty quick. I mean, I guess the first thing is before I'm okay. I'm not and I guess I could be overruled, but I don't think we need. Do we need to take official action here, or I mean, we're essentially saying by first read get it to 2%, right? I mean, that's pretty well established. So I'm of the mind we don't have to do any official action tomorrow, but I'm open to input for that.
Put another, just if I could, put another way, like you did last year, you're putting everyone on notice that there will be an adjustment to 2% in first reading. Whether the school and I take advantage of the next 3 weeks and figure out what that looks like is our prerogative. Exactly. So I don't think there's any action required.
I'm of agreement. I just want to make sure everybody's under Don. Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Peter. I forgot.
So
I was just nodding my head. I'm in agreement. I'm okay with that, Don.
So along with that, though, Tom, and again, I don't want to get ahead of my skis here, but as you've modeled things in terms of 3 levels. Can we, if we're going to do that, the 2% would be the middle value, a 3% would be the high value, and what would be the low value?
No, my understanding is the 3-tier is not necessarily part of this. There's an initial move to 2%, and sounds like potentially an expectation that there's a second step that's happened over the next 60 days.
But we're going to see different iterations of a budget. The one we've seen has 3 levels. We've talked at great length about high, medium, low. Is that something we can decide? And if not here, can we determine that perhaps, as a council? Because I'm fine with the direction, with what we've decided directionally, but clarity is a good thing.
Yeah, that's.
I totally agree with Don, because I mean, the partners we don't have on speaking up right now, is the school board. And I mean, was it last year or the year before? I'm sorry, when the first read got rejected. So I'm a little concerned that we need to take a path that ensures that we have a path forward, that we understand out of first read. I guess Tom gave me a little pause for thought when he said whether or not we use the 3 weeks. I guess that's up to us. And so, I guess that kind of, put a little shiver up my spine, not for you, Tom. I think I understood how you meant it, but, I suppose that means, the BOE could come back and say, well, we didn't agree with the target and we're going forward with what we gave you already. So I don't think they will, but I guess that was concerning to me. And I think those of us who talked about tiers, and with Paul's strategy and my strategy, even though, Paul didn't join the consensus, I did join the consensus, but, if we're not going to see any other numbers, if people just come back with the same numbers they have, that's going to be incredibly concerning for me 3 weeks from now. So I have a real concern with that.
John?
Is that me, Peter?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that I view the process a little differently. I expect Tom and the school department to come in with what they feel is their most appropriate budget based on their knowledge and experience and the input that we've given them. But that's how we start the process. And then it's ours. Then we have to say, you know what, that's not going to, we can't sell that. That doesn't work for us. And so it's really our adjustments that we're making from the point that they deliver a budget. So I guess what we're talking about is, are we going to work off of what they've delivered already? Or is there going to be another submission to us? And I don't have clarity on which one will be the case. But I'm also comfortable working from either. I think we need to get to the same place at the end of the day, which will be less than the 3%.
But let me just I think what we're saying now, what I thought the consensus was around, at least what we're asking for right now, they asked for guidance. I think the consensus here was what we'd like to see at first read are budgets that produce a 2% mill rate increase. And the joint finance committees are going to work on that. And you're right, John and Betsy, if those aren't delivered, then that starts the process for us to, say that that's not acceptable and here's the number. But I think what we're trying to do in good faith is saying, let's look at what a 2% budget looks like. To get to Don's point, and we'll probably hear a lot more from our constituents between now and then. But we just need a starting point. I think we can't they were asking for some clear direction. We're not saying it's going to end up at 2%. It may be lower than 2%. It may be higher than 2%. All we're trying to do is to have a similar starting point that we can start the informed conversation. And it's not all that different. I think this is the process we've followed prior years. We had just set a 3% mill rate, but that was before all this happened. And so I think, Don, to your point, I think there's some in the community are going to feel these are different times and there's so much uncertainty. We should be doing something different. So we have a lower increase. Others are going to feel, until they know what those services are, they're going to be the trade-offs and not delivered. But this gives us a better starting point. I mean, to answer your question, John, we know the 5.5 is not, I think no one's saying that they can support that at this point. I think there's consensus around here. Most of us can support a 3 or 2%, some less. So I'm just testing, this conversation. We'll come back to this conversation over the next 60 days. But they asked for guidance. We're trying to give guidance. We're trying to at least come out with some clarity. So I don't know, Tom, I see your hands up.
Yeah, to answer my expectation is that we're not going to rework this budget and you'll have a new budget in front of you. I would expect there'll be an amendment to reduce it to the 2% in first reading. And I say that because I think we heard very clearly from your school colleagues that they take their responsibility seriously. And I think they would prefer having the starting point being where they think it should be. And then the process takes it to a different point. I feel similar in that regard. I'm sure if Peter's willing to initiate the joint finance meetings, we'll make good use of these 3 weeks. You're putting us all on notice much earlier than we ever have been before. We have something in the order of 80 days to work through this from this point. And this level of clarity has never been provided prior. So I like staying as consistent with process as we can, but I think we've also taken advantage of the opportunity of time here and full disclosure in terms of what the expectations are.
So Paul, I don't know, sounds like at least from this workshop, there's a consensus around that. I don't know your closing thoughts or suggestions.
No, I think we have some clarity. So I think that I think we got there. I think that what we just signaled is that at first reading, the budget will be adjusted down to whatever at that time equates to a 2% mill rate increase. And so everybody moving forward is going to be working within that. We have 3 weeks before first reading. If we go, it's for everybody that's watching, first reading is on the agenda for tomorrow, but I suspect somebody will make a motion to table. And then in which case we would, like Peter's reiterated several times, and I appreciate that he's doing it, is then we have more work to do between first and second reading. And hopefully we have more clarity between first and second reading as well. Perhaps this isn't, maybe this isn't as dire as we all think it is. I'm not suggesting it is or isn't because none of us know. But what I think we just signaled to the BOE and to Tom is at first reading, we are going to amend that budget down to what at that current time equates to a 2% mill rate increase. And everybody go forth and make it happen for 3 weeks and let's see where we're at. So
I have a question about delaying 3 weeks for the first read. I struggle to see the benefit in that. Whereas if we did the first read sooner, we could start the joint finance committee meetings sooner and start the process of working through that. Tom, from your perspective, is there another benefit of delaying? You're on mute, Tom, sorry.
Right. I far prefer the benefit of delaying the start. There's nothing that precludes the joint finance folks to meet between now and then before the start. We don't typically do that, or not as robustly as I expect we will, but there's no reason you can't.
Right.
It's worth just kind of running through what that revised schedule looks like. And I'm proposing that we use the existing regular meeting dates. You can vary from that if you like. And so the tabling action would be to table acceptance of the budget and first reading till May 6th, which is effectively 3 weeks, the way the calendar works. And then June 3rd would be public hearing. June 17 would be second reading. And then of course, the validation vote on the 14th. And you could buy some extra time in June, but I recommend we give a robust absentee voting period. Given the circumstances, I think folks are gonna not be comfortable, all of them, to come to the polls. So I think it'd be wise to get to provide as much time on the back end for folks to accomplish that absentee voting process. So that's my suggestion for a revised schedule.
Everybody okay with that?
Question, Peter?
Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Tom,
Yes.
can I ask you, Tom, can you do us a favor and try to build out the detail for that revised schedule in this similar format and, level of detail, maybe even the colors of the one we saw in the first budget presentation,
Sure.
just so we get the full picture. Thank you.
Yep.
And Tom, can you, as far as it relates to the town council finance committee, can you think about, do we want to take advantage of some of that time to talk to more of your departments, or just give some thought to whether we keep the dates we have to start some of that work, or do you want some time to work? So anyway, just give that.
Yeah, I think I'll propose a reset to that as well.
Okay, great.
That will start after first reading.
Okay. Jean Marie, did I see your hand up? Okay. So with that, I think that's a wrap. Everybody agree? Paul, you okay?
Yes, I'm sorry. I am. Yes, I know I have been off screen, but I am okay. Yeah, I think we have some. I'll pause. I'll pause for a quick minute to do public comment if anybody would like to make a comment. Let me check my email real quick to see if anybody has written an email. Nobody has written an email. I'm going to the attendees to see if anybody in the attendees are raising their hand. And Ms. Gleistein.
I have a procedural question. So I think I heard that we're not going to vote tomorrow on this approach. Are we going to describe it at the meeting during the conversation for the table, or?
Yeah, I mean, the way tabling works is as soon as somebody makes a motion to table and it gets seconded, there's no more discussion allowed. So I would suspect we can make a motion to approve a second. We can have lots of discussion. And then when that discussion is done, somebody can make a motion to table it. So yeah, and if we do it that way, and to be clear, maybe the motion to table would fail. But obviously it doesn't seem like it would here. But yeah, it's still going to be moved for approval. It's still going to be seconded. I'm still going to open up to discussion amongst ourselves and public comment. And then once we feel like the discussion is exhausted, somebody will make a motion to table.
Right. I guess my only question on procedure there then is, so let's say people sleep on this overnight and, 4 or 5 of us have, absolute nightmares, and we go, oh my goodness, it's got to be a 10% increase, or it's got to be a negative 10% increase or something. And we come into the meeting tomorrow with that level of discussion. I don't think that will happen. But I'm just wondering if we want to frame it where that we do give an ultimate, kind of, okay, Tom, okay, BOE, regardless of all the discussion today, regardless of discussion tomorrow, here's what we're setting the line in the sand. Or are we basically saying we don't want to discuss it too much tomorrow night? This is the guidance that we're sending forward. I guess I'm just not clear. Is this the guidance, or are we going to discuss the guidance further? Yeah, I can go either way. If I sleep on something, you might not want me to do that because no telling what I'll come up with next. But I guess the guidance. Is this the guidance today? Is this what we're passing on, or are we going to discuss it? And if we do discuss it, I would almost say, are we going to do another consensus like we did today, or are we going to actually take a vote?
No, I have no plans on actually taking a vote on this. I think this is nothing more than direction. I think that we're assuming everybody's going to act in good faith moving forward on this. And again, ultimately, when first reading does happen, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's 3 weeks from now, it's ultimately our decision to adjust the budget down to whatever we want it to. Yep. So, and maybe those conversations evolves between now and then. We're still in an incredibly fluid situation, but by all means tomorrow, I'm planning, we can use the time to discuss, and if something drastic happens and something happens, I don't foresee it happening like you said, but I don't think official action is needed here. I think looking at our attendees, I believe every member of the BOE is either currently on mute or in our attendees. And I think that we've demonstrated there's a pretty clear consensus. And again, in theory, can everybody ignore everything we just did? They can. And then we would react accordingly on first reading. But so I guess I didn't really answer your question. I'm sorry, but.
Well, I think that's the action point, though, is first read. We're going to need enough support to amend what is presented to us.
Yeah,
And,
right.
and if we can't do that, then we can't amend it. So that's,
Right. And if between now and then that first read goal turns out greater or less than what we just talked about, nobody's being held to anything right now. We're not taking any action, so to speak. So if we fast forward in 3 weeks and first reading ends up being a 25% increase in the budget, then so be it. So.
But I think it would be helpful, to the extent that there is consensus at this point, to have some discussion tomorrow night around what that is for the benefit of the public.
Sure.
And for the benefit of those internal to the process too. I mean, they're all aware of it, but I think reiterating it so as many people can hear it and understand it can only be to your benefit.
Yeah. Okay, with that, I think we're all done. I don't think we vote to adjourn on workshops, correct? They're just over?
I think they're just over, yeah.
Do we vote? I can't remember.
No, I think
Oh,
No need.
it's cocktail hour, right? Somewhere?
hi, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
bye. Thank you.
Thank you.